Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Kyle's Corner. We're running a little bit late today, but it was for a good reason. Carlos and Yolanda had to eat some potatoes, which is very thematically relevant to the fantasy community. So, I'd like to welcome my guests, collectively known as Storytoob, but Yolanda and Carlos. And I think they are two wonderful people that have been in this community for a while. And I remember when you guys first started your channel and how excited I was. And I think you guys have a really unique energy that you bring to BookTube. So do you want to introduce yourself for people who don't know you and what you guys are about, what you read, stuff like that?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for the kind words, and cheers for inviting us on. As for who we are, I am Yolanda and she is Carlos. And we are collectively, as you said, Storytoob. We read stories. What do we read? This is a thing on our channel now. Like, oh my God, what do they read?
Random stuff. A bit of everything. I wasn't sure there for a second if you were going to say the potatoes are on brand for fantasy or for Ireland. I wasn't sure which way.
You know what? I thought about that afterwards, and I was like, that's probably what they thought I meant. But no, I was just thinking about the fact that it was Lord of the Rings.
Nice.
Yeah, no, that's same thing.
Yeah, we read a bit of everything. We've kind of landed in a fantasy, sci-fi, primarily a fantasy heavy corner of BookTube because it's most of the people we interact with or that we knew before starting the channel basically. And we do read a good bit of fantasy and sci-fi, but we also read crime and crime and fiction and like all kinds of stuff. But one of the things that got us to start a channel was that we were trying to find people talking about crime authors that we like or crime authors we wanted to try. And it seems to not be as heavily represented on BookTube as a lot of other genres. So we figured maybe there's an audience for that. So we're trying.
Yeah, also fantasy was just what I was reading at the time that I discovered BookTube. So it was like I go in phases with what I like to read. But normally I like to switch it up every book or so. Like I don't think that we really discriminate necessarily. I mean, I've never read romance, but that'll change. Like I don't really say that I'm not going to read that genre. So I guess that's what our channel is kind of known for at this stage.
And I love that because you guys read very widely and eclectically. Every wrap up is like just kind of all over the place in terms of genre. And as somebody else who does that, I really admire when people do that because one thing I've noticed about our little sphere is people say that they're fantasy readers, and they are for the most part. But when people sell a book really well, like people aren't snobby about it. They're going to be like, you know what?
Yeah.
He's been talking about Power of the Dog. Maybe I'll check that out. And so I do think that, you know, you guys being able to talk so like passionately about crime fiction or literary fiction or hot girl fiction is going to get more people to check that out and broaden their palettes. So I always really like that from you guys. And I've been meaning to read more crime novels because I do really like them. But the problem that I have with them is that there's so many authors for me that are untested. Like I haven't found the authors that I really like in the genre. So I have to kind of keep working on that.
It's also it's an odd genre because so there's a whole different conversation with like defining what crime fiction is versus thrillers versus mysteries versus whatever, which I guess for fantasy BookTube it's all the same. But then
it's not the same to me. I pretty differently pacing, different structure to me.
100%. And I think that's what I think that's part of the problem as well, because it's such a widely sold genre of fiction, probably more so than fantasy. Although fantasy is certainly catching up in the last few years. Crime fiction and thrillers and mysteries are like so dominant in.
You just read this one, didn't you? Mystic River?
Such a great book.
I've been wanting to read this for years, and I found it for $1 like last week, and I was like, "Oh, well,
nice,
worth it.
Time to pick it up."
I think you might like that.
I do really like Shutter Island. I have tried Dennis Lahan. Also, I mean, The Wire is my favorite show of all time, and he wrote on that. So, like,
Yeah.
he gets a pass. And I've also
Yeah,
seen the
sure.
movie for Mystic River, so I'm sure that I'm going to really like it.
Yeah.
I recently tried George Pelecanos, who also wrote on The Wire,
Yes.
and he was good as well.
I have a
happened
few of his books, but I haven't read
Cool.
it yet.
Cool. I happened to pick it up right after Mystic River, so I think I was a little bit harsh on it when I was reading it, just because it wasn't Mystic River. And I
That's
really
fair.
loved that book, but it's good. Like he's a good writer, and yeah, like you said, you have to find your niche for crime. Like I have found over the years that I'm not super into cozy murder mysteries.
Yeah.
There's really good ones, and I like the Agatha Christie that I've read, but I think it needs to be really great for me to be like, oh yeah, I'm enjoying this. Whereas, like, you know, if it's your favorite thing, you might enjoy a more average one because you just like the tropes of it. So that's, yeah. But something I had to realize, like when I first got into crime, Don Winslow was one of the first authors I discovered, and still one of my favorites, or my favorite author. And I then kept going back.
Really?
And I know I've never talked about him. I'm very shy about it. But I then would go back into the bookstore and look for random crime fiction. I'd be like, oh, I found him in the crime section, so I'm just going to grab other crime books from the same section, and kept being disappointed because it was not the same thing. So
That's the problem.
Yeah.
Like, because it's such a
Yeah.
wide genre and it's such a huge selling genre, the bookshelves are flooded with mediocre to crap books.
oh, you can't trust the bestsellers for
No.
crime.
No.
I mean, it's probably true for a lot of genres.
Yeah, I
right?
was gonna say, like, you could argue it from that perspective for fantasy too. I do think,
Yeah.
you know, like fantasy nerds are gonna appreciate different aspects of the more average novels, and
Yeah.
also fantasy isn't as marketable, so there's less people getting in it just for money. There's
Yeah.
definitely still gonna be some, but I do think that, like, and crime fiction, I'm sure you need a lot of talent to write a really good one, but I suspect you could get by writing an average one with just a medium amount of talent. And so I think a lot of people probably are just like, I could write this. I've seen a lot of SVU or whatever, you know, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think when you're well read in it, you just pick up on that like that. Like I've been noticing this, like talking to people
Within 5 pages, you can tell if a
Yeah,
crime book is going to be
like
good.
there's a crime book club on in my workplace, and the book last month I didn't like at all. I thought it was painfully average, and multiple people, when they realized it was a new pick, they were like, oh, I really like that, you're going to enjoy it. And then I was like, whoa, this is not good. And the pick for this month I'm really enjoying. It's Mick Herron's Slow Horses, and multiple colleagues told me, oh, I didn't really like that. And I was thinking about it, and I realized they're not regular crime readers. Like I think a lot of people that would there's an audience that would pick up crime just because they want like a popcorn thriller, which is absolutely fair. But if you're looking for something a bit more, I don't know, meaty, there's a lot of painfully average stuff, like you said, because people are probably like, yeah, I can regurgitate all of this stuff that I've watched and like throw it into one thing, and then like something semi-coherent will come out.
It might take a little less imagination or stretching your brain to do the work to create a story when you don't have to also create the world along with it. So like I agree with Mike's comment there.
Yeah,
that's what I was going to ask. I think this is probably fair.
Yeah, I do agree. I mean, I don't have any stats to back it up, but I agree.
So Yolanda, you're a bookseller. What would you say are like the really big crime books that sell that you just don't think are worth it? Let's call some people out.
Oh,
that aren't worth it. So Richard Osman, The Thursday Murder Club.
Oh, that's funny. That's the thing I was going to bring up, because I was looking at you guys' Goodreads, and I saw that Carlos gave the first book of that a 1 star recently. I was like, I didn't even know he gave 1 star. So you guys can talk about that.
Yeah.
I don't talk about books I don't like that much on the channel, but there are books that I have no problem giving 1 star to, or like saying,
I didn't like it at all. Like, it is like the ultimate cozy murder mystery. Like, it's so cheesy, and it's not meant to be taken seriously in the terms of, you're not meant to think this would actually happen, but I couldn't suspend my disbelief. It's like, so it's 4 people in an old person's home, right? That solve a mystery, but they get involved with the police, and the police like give them details about the murder they're investigating, and I'm like, I'm pretty sure that's not legal. Like, and she does it over text as well. I'm like, you're gonna get caught. This is stupid.
there's also like bits of cringy dialogue that feel inauthentic because there's not a ton of research going into this. So it's also like Richard Osman. I don't know if anybody knows him, but in the UK, he was a TV show presenter of a game show and kind of a dorky dude.
Oh, I didn't know that.
I didn't know either.
And he writes stuff in the book where I'm just like, shut up, Richard.
When he talks about like, oh, and this guy used to be muscle for the drug people, and you're just like, you don't know what you're talking about. Like, it just feels, like you said, this person has this knowledge because of watching TV, not because they did any kind of real research, and you can tell. So I don't get the hype for that. I get like some people enjoying it because it's like kind of quirky, but I don't get the levels of hype. I don't think it would be this hyped if he wasn't already well known in the UK.
That makes a lot of sense to me. My wife bought it because she did like it was just popular, and it was like on sale, so she got it. And then she read it, and she was like, "Yeah," I was like, "Okay, it was fine. Like, you should read it." And I just haven't, so I probably won't.
I think it's okay. It's fine. Is like a very accurate description of it. Another one.
I'm a little harsher to crime books, I think, because I like your average crime book. I like it if I feel like it's not trying hard enough to be good, for lack of a better word, or even just if you are making basic mistakes or basic things that I feel like any editor would pick up on, just to get a book out onto the shelves as quickly as possible, I can't stand that, and that happens. Sure. That happens way more often with crime, I notice, so like and thrillers or whatever.
I think it hasn't been even as popular. Like YA definitely had that boom for a while, where it's just like, slap a teenage girl in it and give her a group of different people, and then we're good.
And it's all the same. And like, there's good ones in there, but you have to like get to them. Another one that I was actually, now I haven't read the full book, but I read like the first 10 pages, and that was enough. Was The Silent Patient.
Oh yeah.
I
hated that book. I hated that book. I just read that like last month. Such a bad book. I do not understand
why the
book is so popular. I read the whole thing. And also, I have a psych background, so like I shouldn't have. But I was so curious. I was like, there has to be a good twist. I'm like, this book is not good. I don't like it. The psych representation is terrible, and I don't expect it to be very accurate in a thriller. Like, if it was a literary fiction novel, I might maybe be like, they should have got the. But I know in a thriller they're going to play fast and loose with it. But even by those standards, I was like, this is just absolute nonsense. So I don't get it.
Yeah, I feel validated because I read. Yeah, it was about 10 pages, and like the first chapter or whatever is a diary entry. And in the diary entry, she's like, I am writing in this diary. It is like gold and black rimmed or whatever, and it has nice paper. I'm like, who describes their diary to their diary when they're like, how did that get past an editor? I don't get it.
She just wanted to paint a picture to the people reading her diary. Like, she'd be reading the diary, and people would be like, it is gold trimmed. Interesting, yeah.
There is also... And I think it's an interesting conversation as well about like maybe the levels of literacy in people nowadays, in that books like that, some of them can be fun and competently written and you suspend your disbelief and it's a fun time and it's okay. Some of them are ridiculous and silly and stupid and should never have been published. But there is a conversation, I think, about, the fact that those are the books that might reach people that read one book a year or don't read it all. They might pick up a book once every couple of years, and
Yeah, I agree.
they're going on holiday and they want something fun and whatever. They don't want to think about it, and that's also fair. But the fact that the market is flooded with books like that and not the same objective but competently written is
Yeah.
frustrating.
Yeah, because you can have a fun popcorn read that
100%.
is very easy to just like
Oh, yeah.
breeze through. That's competent and good.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, yeah. And like I don't I mean there's so many different types of readers in the world. Like I came across, like I have a coworker, and I had never heard this particular type of reader before as a person who exists. And I was asking her about what she read, and she's like, "Oh, I only read stuff in first person." And I was like, "Okay, like some people have a preference for first person." And I was like, "Yeah, like I like a lot of first person stuff too." And then she's like, "No, like I've literally never read a book that wasn't in first person that I'm aware of." And I was like, "Really?"
Wow.
And she was like, "Yeah, like she's like, if it's not in first person, I just will not read it. Like I don't even try." And I'm like, "That's crazy to me." But like there's nothing saying that that's wrong, except that I would imagine she's missing out on a lot of books she would probably like before trying. But like, so there's so many different types of ways to read that I think people try to look down on people who just want to like read something fast and quick. Like I understand why somebody would want to read The Silent Patient. And if you read it and you just turn your brain off and you like it, that's perfect. I love Fast and Furious. They're ridiculous. They're not good. But Fast and Furious is competently made.
That is
and
true.
The Silent Patient is not. And that's what I think the difference is. So I totally agree with you guys on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Like I don't judge anybody who enjoys The Silent Patient. I wish sometimes I could turn off my brain a little bit more when it comes to reading, but I think when you've read a certain amount or for a certain amount of time, you just pick up on these things.
It comes with a level of literacy that you can only get from reading a certain amount. Like people on BookTube or people in this sphere read a lot, so you'll naturally just bounce off things like that more. And then it also happens when you stick in your bubble as well a little bit. Like there is nothing wrong with sticking in your bubble, but if you then go out and try something else, you might look at it with the same eyes that you look at this thing that is totally different. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, yeah.
And I try not to do that.
I think there's a lot of value in branching out and trying new things, even if you don't like it. It's going to make you appreciate the things you do like more. And I think a lot of people who don't do that often don't realize that because they haven't done it. And like, again, you don't have to like everything. Nobody's going to like every genre, every type of movie, every activity. But even just the act of trying things outside of your comfort zone can really make you realize, I actually don't like romance books because X, Y, and Z, and I do like them in this, or whatever the case may be, So variety is the spice of life and all of that.
I also, I struggle with the thing that people say of, I don't like this kind of book without having read that kind of book.
Drives me nuts. You know, the number one that drives me crazy is people who have never watched like any sci-fi movie or anything, any book, and they're like, I don't like Star Wars. I don't like that type of thing. Now, I've met people who don't like Star Wars, and that's totally valid. Like, I'm not saying you have to like Star Wars, but if you've never even flirted with the idea of reading something sci-fi or watching something sci-fi, and you're just like, I don't like that type of thing. I'm like, Star Wars is one of the most successful things of all time. Like, it gets even non-sci-fi nerds. Like, you should maybe watch 10 minutes of it first. Like, just give it a little glimpse.
Give it a good bash. Like, and if you find something and it happens to be bad, it doesn't mean that then the entire sphere of that thing is also bad. Like, if I wanted to try a new genre, I would ask several people, look online, try to pick out 4 or 5 of that thing, and then at least give a few of them a go, and preferably some different authors as well, because it might just be that one author doesn't work for you. And also, books just sometimes don't hit you at the right time. Like right now, I am reading a book that is objectively very good, and I'm not really enjoying it, but only because I just read The Power of the Dog by Don Winslow. That was so smooth, but ridiculous, like so good and so much going on. And now I'm reading Slow Horses by Mick Herron,
Which is
which
the one I'm reading too.
Mhm.
I think is objectively a very good book, but I'm just not clicking with it yet. But I think I have a book hangover, but also the style of writing is different. It's, yeah. So it's
Yeah, I mean, there's
very,
always
very
different things going on, and there's so many things under the surface that we don't know about too. People be like, "I really didn't like this book," and you know, you could have just that month been under a little bit more stress, and so you weren't getting as much sleep, and so like little things that maybe wouldn't have bothered you actually bothered you way more than they normally would have, and then that tipped the scales into you only focusing on the things you didn't like. And
Yeah.
there's no way to really know that about yourself. Like sometimes you just read a book at the wrong time and you're
Yeah.
never going to get that experience back. But I think the more we think about the way in which that stuff matters, there might be times where we're like, you know, I don't think I gave that book a particular chance, and maybe like revisit it and see how it goes the second time.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. And like it takes a bit of knowing yourself as well to realize if you're not liking it because it's not for you, or if you're not liking it because of circumstances or expectations. That happens to me all the time. Like if I have set expectations on what a book is going to be, or just really high expectations, because sometimes you just get books where you have a feeling and you think you're going to love them, and when that doesn't quite pay off, it feels like a more negative experience than it would have been. Like I got that with Long Price Quartet. Like I struggled so much.
Oh, really?
Oh, really?
A little. It's still going to most likely get 5 stars for me. But I got the arc of it, and then I didn't read it because I'm really attached to the narration. So I was like, I wanted to physically read it while listening. And since then, everybody who reads Sun Eater is basically like, this is the best book in the series. And I'm like, dude, this is going to blow my socks off. And I think it's probably like my
Yeah.
second least favorite, which is still good. But now I'm just like in that disappointment hole where I'm just like, oh, I was expecting it to like be, you know, the top of the series. And it's just not really hitting that way for me. And that's definitely expectation. I actually might really like it a
Yeah.
lot more when I reread the series before the last one. So
Yeah.
yeah, expectations
what?
plays such a big role.
That is my exact experience with Assassin's Fate earlier this year. Like
Oh yeah, Pete is not going to let you go for the LPQ thing, so you got to go back to that.
I'm sorry.
Did you just read the first one?
Yeah. So
That's
I'm
what I thought I
aware.
remember seeing. Yeah.
Yeah, like I'm aware that people say it's like one big thing and you kind of, but I was hate reading it. And I think I set myself up for failure because for two reasons. One was that in my mind, I was so sure it was going to be like one of my favorite series ever, from like what people say about it. And like, even from like the negative things, I was like, slow, character driven, like this sounds so like my cup of tea, that I was so certain that I just shot myself in the foot. And then the other thing was that we have like the two omnibus editions of like the first two and then the other two. And I was like, it's like 240 pages. I'm going to read this in like 2 days. But it's the omnibus edition. The pages are longer. Like the text is like not, the font is not that big. It's quite like dense. You need to like learn the world and stuff. So I was reading it a lot slower than I expected, which is fine. But again, expectations. So I was like, I'm going to breeze through this thing that I'm going to love. And that was just not the experience. So I ended up having a very negative experience, even though I know that is not a bad book, that I might actually enjoy if I read it in 10 years. But I just need to erase that from
10
my
years
memory.
is a bit long to sleep on the Long Price Quartet, but I will say I do think people pitch it slightly wrong. At least in my experience, I don't think it's like one book. Like people are like, oh, it's like one book told over four. I get why they say that. Each book tells its own narrative arc, and then just by the end, you see the thematic. Like I think thematically, it very much works as one story because it's everything in the last two books, especially, is kind of focusing on the fallout from the stuff in the first book, and it's all intertwined, and like in that way it's really good. But I think just a good series does that anyway.
Yeah.
So I think Shadow and Summer is very much like it tells a complete story, and then each individual book tells another portion of the story in the people's lives. But I get why people would jump or bounce off that first book because I really liked it, but it is a lot of world building that is like peculiar, and then also there's a lot of posing, which like if you over focus on that, I could see that being a big.
That drove.
Clearly, that was a problem for you.
That drove.
I just sped right past it. I never tried to visualize it. I was just like, okay, they're posing, whatever.
Yeah, I think I need to. You know what? Like, not 10 years, but in a couple of years, I will give that another go.
You got so angry at the posing.
I think I just, like you said, I got hung up on it. And then like once, it's like when you see something and you can't unsee it. And I generally, so I struggle if a book is written in a way that I don't know what I'm meant to picture for like too long. Like if there's a dream sequence, like that's fine. But like if it's like just not setting a scene very like precisely, even if it's just like vibes, that's fine. But so the fact that there was constantly posing and the meaning of the posing, but nothing about what it looked like, I'm like, is this like a hand thing? Like is it like sign language, or are they like dancing around? Like
an actual flaw of the series. I think not explaining the posing at least a little is like an active detriment. It doesn't make sense to not at least. Like you don't have to get into it each time, but at least at the beginning of a book or one time, be like, "This is what the posing kind of looks like," and then move on.
And
because
then
it's like I'm the same way. I picture like each time they're like the pose of intimity, and like they're just like I'm just like, what are you guys doing each time?
Yeah.
And it's one of those things where like when a series gets an adaptation and then they adapt it to live action, and people are like, I'm really, really like attached to the Targaryens having purple eyes or Dario Naharis having a green beard. And then they don't do that because they're like, actually, this just looks silly when you actually try and picture a human being that looks like Dario Naharis, you're like, that doesn't work.
Yeah.
But in a book, you can just kind of handle. That's what I feel like it is with the posing. I think he just said it because it was like a cool cultural detail. But day one, Daniel Abraham sitting in a showrunners meeting for like adapting it. Day one, they're like, we're doing away with the posing. Like, there's just no way.
Yeah.
It just would look silly. And I think that's part of the reason why people push up against it if you start picturing it.
Yeah, definitely. Because like I picture like, because posing, I picture like a full body thing.
Yeah, me too.
It's a body thing. Yeah. So like I'm just like, are they like dancing around the room? Like, this is like an interpretive conversation. It's just,
they should adapt it as musical theater.
Are you guys, either of you, Cosmere fans? I can't remember.
No, well, you.
I've read Mistborn. I've only read Mistborn Era 1. I do want to get back to the Cosmere. I think I'll do Warbreaker next, and then Stormlight is like my idea. I don't know when, but I did like Mistborn. But
in Stormlight, I'll keep this very vague because you haven't read it. There's a group of people that they have a bit of musicality to them. So when they get annoyed or they get mad or confused, whatever, they unconsciously start humming a tune. Okay. So they'll hum to like the rhythm of whatever the thing is. And so, but it'll tell you what it is and what it means. But that's what it reminded me of in Daniel Abraham's posing. The only difference being Sanderson will actually tell you what the pose.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not a pose, but he'll tell you what the hum is supposed to be. It's like they're humming the rhythm of anger or whatever it is. But, and I just thought that was interesting, the difference.
But the little I know of Sanderson is I would expect a writer like him to have like a consistent rule base for that kind of thing, you know? And I'd not necessarily have to over explain it, but like at least be consistent with it in a sense that he's obviously more of a magic system person, so it's quite like hard and scientific, I assume. But for something that is like softer, just a bit more mysterious, like in Malazan, there's still a consistency to like how the Warrens work or whatever, you know. Right. It's
I do not agree with Matt at all for this. Matt says you may enjoy reading the first two Stormlight books before reading Warbreaker. Like you certainly could. I think Warbreaker before the second book is like maximum amount of enjoyment, but like it doesn't really matter. I know why he's saying that. Like it's not like I think he's wrong. I think it's better the other way. But it doesn't really matter that much. And Warbreaker's a standalone. So if you read that, that's like less of a commitment than reading a Stormlight book. But Warbreaker's great. I reread it this year and it holds up.
Yeah, it appeals to me. I don't remember who told me this or if I just read this somewhere, that Warbreaker ties into Stormlight, or like that there's some reference or something. So that's why I thought I'll read that
It
first,
does.
and just to read like another Sanderson that isn't Mistborn or getting into the huge.
I think it helps with trust. I think like Stormlight Archive requires so much trust from the reader, and a lot of that trust might be built off if you like. I started with Stormlight, but I liked epic fantasy, so I was like, I'll trust that it'll eventually pay off. But if you already trust Sanderson's ability to like make payoff work, I think that helps in general. Yeah, they are connected. I always say it like this: you can read them in either order. Like you could read Stormlight and then go back and read Warbreaker, and you'll be like, oh, yeah, that's cool. But for the maximum amount of like surprise or excitement factor, I guess it would be like, I don't know how to explain it. It's better to read it first because like it makes more sense as a reveal the other way.
I get you.
Okay.
But it's not that big of a deal. Like it doesn't matter too much. Wow, Pete
Interesting.
slamming Warbreaker over here. I didn't know. You just got your Dragonsteel pass. You can't talk ill about Lord Sanderson anymore, Pete. Like, you gotta wait.
Did you? So you read Stormlight before Mistborn. How did you read Mistborn then after?
So I read the entire Cosmere besides Elantris, and this was before the Secret Project came out. I read it all in 3 months.
Shit.
Wow.
That's not true. It took me like 3 months to read the first half of Way of Kings. And then I read the second half of Way of Kings and then caught up with the Cosmere besides Elantris within 3 months. I read the first 3 Stormlights, basically. I read the first one, then Warbreaker, and then the next 2 Stormlight. And then I was like, I need a break from Stormlight, so then I read the Mistborn trilogy and then went back.
How did you find going from the big one to the slightly less big one?
I didn't have any issues. I like both styles of Sanderson. Era 2, I would say, of Mistborn is the only one where like I don't think I'm on board with the project as much as Sanderson is. But it's still like good. And I'm just like, I don't really like these characters that much. And
it seems to be a popular opinion, yeah.
Well, the interesting thing is people think the popular opinion is whatever they don't agree because people tell them about it all the time. So anybody who loves Era 2, they're like, yeah, I know everybody hates Era 2, but like I am just one of the few that love it. And then, but if you're like, I hate Era 2, they'll be like, I know that everybody loves Era 2.
Yeah.
But I don't like it. And it's like, it's because all the people that don't, or the opposite, are telling you about it.
Yeah.
But it is very different from the first era.
Yeah, I'll get there. I think when I got very excited.
Can I guess? Can I guess the answer to Ben's question? So Ben
Yeah.
says, do the two of you go into dissociative immersion when they're deeply into a book, or is the analytical brain always on? I am going to guess that you guys don't have the same answer. And I'm going to guess that Yolanda always has the analytical brain on, and that Carlos, when he's really into a book, can immerse right into it. Is that right?
You answer first.
I think I definitely tend to have the analytical brain on, but sometimes I can switch it off. And I think like for specific books, sometimes I'm just like, you know what, I'm having a great time, I don't care. Fourth Wing being an example of that.
I agree.
You enjoyed Fourth Wing, right?
Yeah, I like Fourth Wing.
Yeah,
I'm really glad I read it before the hype, because if I would never have touched it now.
Yeah.
But I didn't really know what I was getting into, and I just thought it was like a fun book. It's like the characters were good. It had good twists. I liked it. I
kind of bought it blindly because a colleague of mine was like, oh, you like fantasy? I really like this one. And I was like, oh, weird. I haven't heard of it. Bought it. And then later, before I read it, found out that, you know, what people say about it. And I was like, oh, okay. Bit more skeptical. And then I saw your Goodreads review and I was like, I'm going to just read this. And I had a good time. Do I think it's like the best thing ever written? Obviously not. It's not the most.
I'm puzzled by the reception to it. Like, I don't think it should be the biggest book of the year, but it was perfectly fine. Like,
yeah, like it's not the best thing that came out in 2023. Like, not even close in fantasy. But I do understand I think I was like 100 pages in, or even like less than 100 pages in. I said to you, yeah, I get it. Like, I understand why it became so popular, because it is like, I understand why the mainstream would latch onto that, because it just barrels through the plot. Like, there's some world building, and I have some issues with some of the world building, but like,
I just didn't think about any of it. Like afterwards, I saw people trashing the book, and they're like, "The society they're in makes no sense." I'm like, "You're absolutely correct." And they're like, "Why are they wasting all of their teenagers killing each other when they're fighting a war?" I'm like, "That is a very good point, sir." But you know what?
not
I just
effective.
didn't care.
Yeah, that was like a case where did my analytical brain shut off because I was just having such a great time. I was like, that was popcorn entertainment, where I thought, to my taste, it was good enough that I could overlook the flaws in favor of just having a good time.
Is that the same though as getting swept up in a story? And so I have a slightly different answer in the sense that maybe to prove you wrong, my analytical brain is always on when I read, but then there are some books, very few, that I get completely swept away, and those are the books that really like are my favorites.
Okay, so you're thinking.
I'm thinking of
the question differently.
Yeah,
because I was thinking, because I do still like. Okay, sorry.
because like my analytical brain is still on if I think a book is fairly mid, but I just keep going because I'm having a good time. My analytical brain is still on in that case, but I am able to switch it off, or at least put it in standby to enjoy myself. But the books that truly stick with me are the ones that I tear through pages, or even if I'm not like tearing through pages, I just get swept away and whisked away, and I forget that I'm reading a book, and I'm not looking at how it's written. It's just,
Thinking of it that way, I think I'm similar.
Yeah.
Like,
but there are actually very few books that have done that to me.
Yeah, so my analytical brain is never off, even in my favorites. Now I can still get swept away in things. Like I read the whole Cosmere in 3 months. So like I read 750 pages of Words of Radiance in one sitting. So like, but there are things that like in that moment. So there's a world building thing that Sanderson does, and I'm going to tell you, and maybe you can pre-accept it so that when you get to it, it doesn't drive you crazy, because it drives me crazy.
Cool.
In Stormlight Archive, men in the main religion aren't supposed to read and write. It's seen as feminine. So only women read and write. And so they have scribes that read things out to men, and then the women are the ones that write things. But the women have no power. It is an entirely masculine hierarchical society, and women basically are like not quite second-class citizens. Like it's a little bit higher, but like essentially it's like know your place kind of, men fight the wars and women do the little girly stuff. Like, and I was literally reading the book, and I had read like 300 pages that day, and my wife was just sitting there, had never heard of Sanderson at this point. And I just turned to her, I was like, I need to rant about how stupid this is. The people who are literate in a society would for sure be controlling the situation behind the scenes. Like they for sure, like that's just like information is power. And if you all are the only people that can write and communicate in this way, you would be like manipulating the guys. Like there for sure shadow alliances between the women to try and like be. I just don't believe that they would just all be like, we're the only ones that can write, but also we'll just do whatever this big burly man tells us. I just don't believe it. And so I literally turned to her and ranted about that for 10 minutes. And then I just went back and just read. And it's just like, I just need to acknowledge that something doesn't make sense. And once I do that, then I'm just like, then I'm fine. And so nothing ever truly kicks me out of that analytical side. And I'm really jealous that some people can just shut that off.
That makes no sense, because knowledge is power, and knowledge comes with literacy. Like that's like if all the like that makes no sense. So like if you anyway. Okay.
Oh, good question, Ben.
So before you answer that, I'm gonna reframe my answer in terms of that question.
I need time to
think about that. I think my analytical brain is mostly on, to be honest. Like But the thing is, there are books where if it gets to a certain point and I'm loving it, that I'm just along for the ride. And then it's kind of what you described. If like you forget that you're reading a book.
Yeah.
And then maybe there might be minor things that I'm not picking up on.
Yeah.
But that I'm not interested in picking up on anymore because I'm just like, this is amazing. So that there would be like some occasions where that would then turn off my analytical brain. But I feel like even in a case like that, if something a little bit more major showed up, it would switch back on.
It would have to be
nag at me.
It would have to be a fairly major flaw, which again is a subjective thing. A major flaw to you could be not a major thing to somebody else. But yeah, that could still switch it back on even when I'm getting sweat. Yeah. But it would need to be a big thing.
But there are definitely books. I can't think of a specific example now where.
Any of the Red Rising?
Actually, I know what you're referring to, probably. And doesn't bother me.
Oh, no, I wasn't. Now that I actually wasn't criticized. I just mean like I know you really love that series. And I could imagine just being like, I'm reading it and I'm just going.
That's actually a great example because there are things in the first trilogy that really bother people, right? Like specific scenes that really, really bother people. And
I am one of the bothered by most of those scenes, but I still love that trilogy. I'm just like, these are not good scenes.
I get it. I get it.
I was also bothered by some of those scenes, especially in Morning Star, but it was my favorite of the three.
Yes, so, I agree. I agree.
That is actually a great example because that is one where I finished Morning Star and then I saw people ranting about that scene and I was like, huh? What? Didn't pick up on it at all.
Yeah.
Like at no moment did I notice, oh, this wasn't done well. And I agree, it's not great. Like it should have been done a bit differently, and it could have been done a bit differently. And I reread it this year with that in mind, and I thought, I still
there's ways to do it differently. Yeah.
Yeah, like it's fine, but like you could have done it differently, and it would have worked better. But I was so swept up in it the first time that I didn't pick up on it at all. So that's a great example. Whereas in the first book, there's something similar, and that time my brain did go like, what?
My brain was more critical of the first Red Rising book, even though I feel like I'm one of the people who is kinder to that book in our circles.
I don't think it's trash. I think it's. Yeah. I think we might not even be talking about the same thing in the first book. There might be a couple of things people take issue with. The thing that I don't like about the first book is early on, and I think the rest of the series needs it to happen. But at the beginning, you don't have that trust in the rest of the series, so you're just like, oh, he's doing this thing. So I think it's really easy.
I think
it's really easy to roll your eyes and be like, here we go again. But I do think knowing the whole series that like it kind of needed to happen. But
there's also oh sorry, go on.
I was just gonna say I kind of agree. Like it's not what he's actually doing, but if it's happened so early, like you said, there isn't that trust yet, so you think that that's what he's doing.
So if I can at least minor spoiler just by way of saying the thing, there's a case of fridging also in Memories of Ice. There is a case of fridging that one could criticize, I guess, in where the conversation is now. But I think for the time period that book was written, especially being a big reader of comics of that era that were way worse, I don't think it's the worst case of that. And also the one in Red
I don't
Rising.
even remember what you're talking about, so I don't think it really impacted me that much. I vaguely feel like it pings something. Like I definitely noticed it, but I've already forgotten what it is.
So. It's one of the side characters that there is a plot element of that. But I actually think that for for him to use it, he handles it fairly respectfully in a way. But it's still, you could still criticize it. But definitely not the worst of that time period. Anyway, I was just going to say that to answer Ben's question, I've come up with a sort of a list in my brain.
All right, let's hear that brain list.
So my brain list of sweepers. Let's call them sweepers because they swept me away. Most recently, Gardens of the Moon. Most recently before that, Lonesome Dove. Then
Nothing even more recent.
Also Power of the Dog.
I thought you were going to start with that one.
Yeah. Conveniently forgot to mention that.
Before we get into your list, I have a question for Yolanda. How long have you been trying to get him to read it? How many years?
6
years.
That's impressive. I remember when my wife picked up Way of Kings, it had been like 3 years of me bothering her, and I was like, oh. So it must have felt relieving when he finally liked it.
So I talked about that book on our first date. Like our first date, we talked about books and like, oh, what do you read? Oh, I really like crime. Have you read Dog Winslow? Have you read The Power of the Dog? You should.
The problem is you bought me Savages and I didn't really click with his style in that one. And he went for something a bit different. And I think I had a sort of fear that I'd been dragging along that I wouldn't like The Power of the Dog. So I just let it pass. And I was wrong.
I just found out when you guys were talking about it with Jimmy that it is not the one that has the adaptation. I had no idea there were two Powers of the Dog. I was picturing Benedict Cumberbatch and Meth
when
Damon
that movie was coming out,
in the desert.
When that movie was coming out, I thought that they were making an adaptation of your one.
My one. Yeah. Yeah, it's caused a good bit of confusion. I actually think that Jimmy initially bought the Thomas Savage one thinking it was the one that I was talking about, and he was like, oh, there's a different one, because other people were reading the Thomas Savage one and he thought it was the same one. It's like it's happened. So now it's kind of a running joke, and I actually just bought the Thomas Savage one for myself, so I was like, you know what, I'm just gonna read this one.
Yeah, you got it. Yeah. Oh, the rest of my list. Sorry.
Yes, the rest of your list.
Heartstone by C.J. Sansom is another one. That's book 5 in the Shard Lake series, of which they have now released a thingy on Disney Plus. What else? What has swept me away? The Chessmen by Peter May, which is the 3rd book in the Black House trilogy, I think it's called, or the Lewis. I think the Lewis trilogy.
Lewis trilogy.
That's also a series, a crime fiction series. A detective goes to the Scottish Hebrides, and very atmospheric, very, very dark and oppressive, basically. But that 3rd book, especially, I remember reading that in like one sitting. That doesn't mean that that's the best book in the trilogy, but yeah, that was one. What else was on my list? Oh, Recursion by Blake Crouch.
How dare you?
I just tore through that book. My brain.
It's that book has some sort of like chemical emitted from it where like you can't stop reading it.
Yeah.
Like I read it one day, but while I was reading it, I was like, this is the dumbest shit I've ever read. That's why I had to read it. Yeah. I didn't like. I had major problems with the second half. First half, amazing. I also really love Dark Matter. I like Blake Crouch, but Recursion chugged that analytical brain into full gear in the second half.
That's fair.
And I was like, but no, I get it. His books are just incredibly addictive.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that got you out of a major reading slump as well. So there's always that. I think sometimes there's just books where, or there, like certain things in books that just like trigger that analytical brain, and it gets to a point where you're just like, I can't get over it now. Like this is all I'm focusing on. And then
I agree. Recursion is really, to say some nice things about Recursion. The intricacies of the plot are really, really good. My main issue with the book, non-spoilers, is that the last like 30 pages got extremely repetitive.
Yes, that is true. Yeah.
Which I've heard a lot of people have problems with. I had problems before that, but that really kicked it in high gear. And it's just a shame that that's what ended the book on, because it like exhausted me and it's all I can think about. But I have to remind myself that I was really liking it up until a point.
Yeah.
Have you guys read Dark Matter?
Yeah.
Yes, I
really liked it.
I also like Dark Matter.
Dark Matter I really liked.
I actually preferred Recursion because I thought that the two central characters, I just liked their relationship more.
I agree with you there. Yes, that is definitely a better part of Recursion. Are you guys going to watch the show?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Comes out like maybe today, maybe yesterday. It's out like this week. I don't know when exactly.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, the cast of that looks really good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm excited for that. I feel like his books would just all make great miniseries because they're so what's the word I'm looking for? Just gripping. Just
gripping. Yeah.
Good TV show plots, I feel.
Yes, and you can tell that like he has that in mind. He's a very like Mike calls him the successor to Michael Crichton, and I totally get that because he like writes sci-fi thrillers, but in a way that like you just can't stop turning the page.
Yeah, so there's a word, and I'm not really sure if it really has a direct translation, but my uncle has a way of describing things. It's in Spanish. Sorry, my uncle is Spanish, so we talk about books in Spanish, obviously. For people that don't know, I am Spanish. He would describe certain books or certain writers as being very peliculero, which is like película is film, and like something being peliculero is that book lends itself to being a film.
Yeah, it's kind of like you're saying movie-esque or something.
Right? Yeah, like that's what I was just going to suggest. But I think it flows better in Spanish for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah. And you can get that even with like A Song of Ice and Fire. Like the reason, like I know people say it was unadaptable before, and there's a lot of reasons why that was the case. But the actual pacing of the series 100%. And the cinematic quality, you can tell George was cooking because he was in TV for so long, and it's definitely had his sensibilities. Yeah. Cinematic, yeah, that's a good word for it.
I see. I feel like that's a different, because cinematic, I look at something as being like visual. Whereas,
true, I see what you're saying. You can have a cinematic scene.
Yes. Yeah. But like, I think when me and my uncle say that word, it's more about the pacing and the.
Almost like if you'd taken a movie script and just
put it in a book,
made it into a novel.
Yeah.
Right. Like punchy and like good dialogue and that kind of thing.
For sure.
Yeah.
So one thing that I wanted to say to you guys. Oh, sorry. Finish what you're saying.
There are books that I don't like that I think would make good movies, such as The Thursday Murder Club, which
I liked the Ready Player One movie, and that book should be burned in a fire and hot garbage. And I famously hate that book with all of my being. So I agree with you.
Fair.
I actually like. I can't believe that movie exists in the form that it does, because if you know anything about the making of Ready Player One, the film, Steven Spielberg had to basically call up all these franchises and be like, could I pretty please, with a cherry on top, use it? And they just all had to say yes. So like the movie impresses me more from that angle, because this stupid idiot writing Ready Player One could just be like, I like Star Wars. Oh, I like, it's tight. This is tight. This is legit. And I'm like, you can write lists of things you like all day. So,
what were you going to say?
I was going to say that one thing that I really like about your journey through Malazan, Carlos, is how excited it gets me to read Malazan again, because I like those books a lot. And most people, when they talk about, not most, a vocal minority of people, when they talk about it, just drive me up the wall. I just can't deal with it.
I understand that,
and it just makes me want to like if I like a scene and it doesn't hit me, and like I didn't want to travel to Egypt and look at the pyramids for 3 days in awe at the wonders of the gods, like then I didn't experience the scene the right way. And
I understand exactly what
that stuff just drives me nuts. And so then I want to dislike the scene on purpose, but I don't. So all I'm saying is, whenever you talk about Malazan, I'm like, that's what I'm talking about. And like you have a way of like putting your passion for the series out and just making it feel like fun. Like, and just like it's a fun series, and there is a lot of thematic depth, and there is a lot of really cool stuff like going on behind the surface and stuff like that. I don't think it's a minority, Mike. I'm trying to be nice. Shh. And so yeah, I just like your review of Memory Vice. I just really loved, and I know that that book like blew you away, and it reminded me that the parts of that book that are really good are spectacular.
Also, like, you know, I think some of the shit that even I said in the review, I'm like, how did I even read into that? But like the book just got me thinking about other things completely unrelated to Malazan or to, like, you know, just like, oh, that's an interesting thing to think about how we approach day-to-day life. And I was not expecting that with Malazan, you know?
Yeah.
So,
I think
that's... Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I don't remember. It wouldn't have been that review, but you somewhere, maybe it was your year-end books. Yolanda was saying that you're talking about it as the first person that made her feel like the series is fun, and the series is fun. And like Alan and Carlos are like the only two people that talk about it that way. I feel like everybody else is just like, yeah, I went and I sat by a river and a waterfall, and I thought about the origin of time, and I cried tears of pure crystal because
yeah, 100%.
Dude, also there's dinosaurs with frickin' swords for frickin' arms.
There
Okay,
are dinosaurs with knives for hands. How are people not talking about this? Like, and I understand that some of these things are cool reveals, and maybe you don't want to spoil them. But I see Jimmy in the chat. Jimmy
also does, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I missed most of Jimmy's Malazan content because I hadn't read it yet. So I just mean like in a more recent sphere. But yeah, no, I know Jimmy talks about it the same way too.
The exposure of like just the general sphere. I try to stay away from Reddit and cesspits like that, but it's like there will be an element of dude bro philosopher that will creep in. Also, the people that maybe will tell you how to read the book, I'm like, let me read the book.
Yeah.
If I don't pick up on this thing this one time, that's okay. It's a big book. And then also just the fact that a lot of people prior to me reading it, from what I saw, just talked about how difficult it is. And I'm like, oh, this is so hard. This is the most complicated thing I've ever read. And then I read Gardens of the Moon, and the reason I love that book so much is that I wasn't expecting it to be so fun. And honestly, in my opinion, quite easy to read.
Yeah, I don't get it at all. Like it being a difficult book, if you've read books that like are epic fantasy like at all, I don't really understand. It just throws you in at the beginning, and then
I get the element of confusion in the sense that he's not openly explaining everything, but I think he gives you enough that you roll with it and you can visualize where you are, not necessarily giving you context and why. But I feel like that's the reason to keep reading, is to keep searching for that why. And he gives you a lot of why as you go along.
I also think the way people talk about, like, we're in such a sphere, so the way people talk about things impact people's reading experience going in. So, like, in a similar way, with Sanderson, what drives me crazy is people think they have to catch all of these, like, Easter eggs for the Cosmere, and if you don't catch them, then like you're not a good fan, or you're not good enough at this. And then so what happens is like there's a novella called Dawn Shard that takes place in between the third and fourth Stormlight book, and I remember vividly because this just will always. I probably talked about this on a live before, but somebody had skipped Dawn Shard and only read the fourth book, which lots of people do. Not everybody reads the novellas, and that person was convinced that they were missing stuff from Dawn Shard, and so the whole book didn't make sense, and so they were hate reading Rhythm of War. This is on Reddit. They were complaining about it, and I was like, actually, like, there's literally like one sentence that references Dawn Shard, and you don't even know that it is unless you know that you read Dawn Shard, so you're not missing anything. And this person was adamant. They were like, no, it's my reading experience, and I know. And I'm like, you only think that way because the way people talk about the Cosmere is that you have to catch. So every time you come up across a mystery, you're like, that must be from Dawn Shard, instead of just reading on. And I think that really impacts negatively when fans talk about the Cosmere that way. Similarly with Malazan, to bring it back.
Yeah.
People talk about the difficulty of Malazan to the point where when people start it, the first thing they're thinking about is that it's difficult. So then as soon as there's a thing they don't understand, they're like, oh, you're right, it is super difficult. But like most books, I would almost hesitate to say all books have some stuff you don't understand at the beginning, but then
Absolutely.
you just focus on, and I think, like, to be fair, Malazan has more things you don't understand at the beginning, but you do understand them as time goes on. And I think a lot of people, if they're focused on the difficulty that they've heard about, they're just like, well, I don't understand the Warrens. Philip Chase literally meditated for 47 days in Tibet, thinking of nothing but Malazan, and he still doesn't understand the Warrens. So like, it's fine.
Yeah. But it's also the fact that I think even more so than a lot of fantasy authors that I've read, and I think at this point now that I've been reading fantasy sort of more consistently for the last 4 years-ish, is it more? Anyway, I don't know. That I feel like I've read a good few fantasy authors, and Stephen Erickson is probably one that just messes with the form more than others. And like the basic structure of a fantasy story, even ones that say that they will, you know, mess around with certain tropes and do their own thing, at their core and like structural level are the same as other fantasy books, structurally speaking. Whereas Erickson presents you with 10 things that are all cool and mysterious, and then gives you a big climax in chapter 2 and just goes off and says, well, how about all these other mysteries then? And you're like, wait, what was going on? But that is part of the enjoyment. And that, to me, was exactly the same as reading any kind of political thriller. And I think I said it in my review as well, where political thrillers are written in that way, where there's a big in media res thing at the beginning of the book with a bunch of characters on like opposing sides of a conflict. And also The Power of the Dog was very much like this, where you have intricacies and mysteries going on. You don't know how all of this is going to converge. Something major happens at the beginning, and then you got to deal with the fallout and more shit happening after that. Gardens of the Moon was just that. And I feel like maybe some of that dialogue is created initially by people who maybe just read fantasy. And that's fine. That's probably a generalization. But I think the idea of somebody who reads literary fiction or somebody who reads classics or even like political thrillers from like the 70s or whatever could go to Gardens of the Moon thinking, I want some fantasy, I want to have some fun, read Gardens of the Moon, and probably have a great time. Like, I can think of some people that might actually really enjoy something like Malazan.
I actually
that don't read fantasy.
I might be misremembering. I think it might have been Jimmy who said this, but I'm not certain, that a lot of people like recommend that, oh no, you need to like read up to Malazan. You need to do all this homework and like be well read in fantasy before you like upgrade to Malazan.
Bollocks.
And I think it was Jimmy who said that
their books
doing it the other way around might actually even be better.
Yeah.
Because then you don't have expectations of how fantasy is supposed to be. It just reminded me from what you were saying. I haven't read any Malazan yet, but I was very put off by the dialogue around. Honestly, not interested in it at all until you read Gardens of the Moon, because I think this is just like the danger of creating this kind of echo chamber where, like you said, like people's reviews of things and how they talk about it will influence other people's experience and then shape how they talk about it, and we all do it. Like, you can't fully stop it. Sure. So like, I don't like listening to too many reviews of stuff before I read it. If I know I'm going to read it, I'd rather just read it and then listen to reviews afterwards and see what other people thought, because you're then looking for the things that you're expecting based on what other people saw. And sometimes maybe you would have had a similar experience and sometimes not. And like, I think that happens a lot with big popular fantasy series where you can't really escape the discourse around them if you're in these spheres online. And Malazan is just an echo chamber of like, oh, we need to talk about it pretentiously. Because if I don't talk about it pretentiously, all the other people that are talking about it pretentiously are going to think that I'm not smart enough. I didn't get it or whatever. And
ironically, the really, really smart people discussing it, like Philip and AP, aren't pretentious about it.
Yeah.
So it's a bunch of people trying to pretend their way up into being like Philip. And I'm like, nah.
And half of those people are probably like perfectly like intelligent and like capable and like aren't, but think they have to talk about it in certain terms because it's how like it's talked about. And like we just need to break out of that. But it just happens. Like you can't escape it.
And also like a willingness and ability to criticize things of like this sort of popularity, that these kind of things that have like a cult following, the ability to be in that circle and then also criticize it is also important.
That's another thing I don't like. And that's all fans. It's just like it happens with Sanderson fans all the time, but the difference is I tend to like Sanderson stuff. So, but like with Malazan, if there's like one thing I don't like, I get like 3 people telling me why that I'm wrong. And I'm like, but I'm not wrong. Yeah. And I do want to circle back to something Yolanda was saying about reading Malazan first as in fantasy. Like I could totally see that being really good for someone, but I also could see it being too heavy because like it is very dense. And I don't want to undersell. The problem is, and this is exactly what Mike was saying earlier, is that people try to this part here, fans overemphasize how difficult it is because people who DNF it because it's too confusing. I think it's mostly an attempt to be nice and acknowledge the validity of those experiences. And that's what I want to do right now. Because I don't want anybody who read or will read in the future Gardens of the Moon and thinks it's too confusing to think that I am calling them dumb or something like that. Because I'm not. It is perfectly valid to read it and be like, this is too confusing. I'm not in the headspace for this.
100%.
Yeah.
I read Grace of Kings in 2015. And that book was extremely confusing to me because I had not read that much fantasy. And Ken Liu's structure is wild, and it wasn't what I would have expected. And he would like introduce a character and follow them for a chapter, and then they just die. And then he'd go talk about their cousin for a while. And I'm like, what the hell's going on? Who are the main characters? It was so confusing to me. And then I reread it in like 2021 to like catch up with the series, and it was way easier. I instantly understood who the main characters were. I could keep track of all of the supporting characters. And that's just because I had read more. And so, you know, it just people hit things differently. And sometimes if you try Malazan and you don't like it, you might not ever like it. Or you might want to come back to it in 2 years. Like, who knows?
Yeah. Also, like, I just don't really care how the Warrens work. I don't care.
I super don't care. Yeah.
I don't care at all. I honestly, I don't really care.
Kevin, it's so good to see you. You should be around more often. Make some videos, man. Drink some Monster on camera.
I think my first exposure to hearing about Malazan was on Mike's channel, on Mike's Book Reviews, and him going through his journey. And every time he talked about it in his updates, it just sounded like a chore. Like he was forcing himself to keep reading. And I just kept thinking, dude, it's fine. Just DNF it if you're not enjoying it. Don't force yourself to keep going. So I think it just stuck with me as like this series is uber complicated and a chore, and you have to read it 4 times before you can start enjoying it. That was like my first impression of it, and like which would put anybody off. But
for sure.
I think like you said with the confusing thing, like there's a balance to everything. I fully expect this to be a series that you read the first time and miss like half of the depth and the detail, and like, but that's true for a lot of really good fantasy. Like you can read A Song of Ice and Fire 5 times, and like still not pick up on half of it. Like there's still stuff that people say, and I'm like, really?
Like book 1 I don't think is still here, but if she is, she can comment on this. But she's been like updating me as she was reading A Song of Ice and Fire, and it was great for a lot of reasons. But the main thing is that she has no exposure to any of the online stuff. There's a lot of stuff that she just like came fresh at, or B, just didn't catch. Like, I have been in the fandom for so long that I know what people say about like what's easy to catch. I'm just like, it's just not true. Like, you guys all have the internet hive mind, and you're trying to pretend that when you read these books for the first time in 2010 that you just caught all this stuff and it's super obvious. And like some people did, but most of you are lying. And so people act like, you know, who's Jon Snow's mother is just a thing that every single person who's ever read the books has ever gotten. And it's just not true. And there's all these like secret identities and stuff. And people are just like, it's super obvious. He describes their eye color. And then 300 pages earlier, he describes the person's eye
in
color.
hindsight. Yeah.
And I'm like, you guys are tripping. And so it's really interesting to see like a very smart, well-read person who's reading it and just not catching this stuff. And I'm like, no, that's okay. Like it is, you're going to come to this differently. And people are just rabid about these kinds of things. Although I do make fun of her all the time for not catching stuff. That's just because she's my friend. So
did she watch the show
no,
at all?
No.
That's so cool.
I have sent her a couple clips. And I think Leanna has sent her a couple clips too. And she had a couple things. There's a couple of things that I just thought was really funny. I don't want to spoil anybody that hasn't read or watched because I want to preserve the next person that's like bookborn. Yeah. But she thought the Red Wedding happened to a different character that also dies in the same book. That's all I'll say. Probably if you read the book, you kind of know what I'm talking about. And she was convinced that was what was going to happen, which changed her experience with the Red Wedding extremely. And I just thought that was magical. That was so good.
That is really cool.
See,
Kevin actually caught everything in the Song of Ice and Fire before he read them. He just
he also said the same about Malazan. So
Kevin caught everything in Winds of Winter, which he read.
Yeah. But that's an experience. So like Bookborn going through that's an experience that I would never have been able to have, and I'm unbelievably jealous of. Even though I was going through my first sort of full read through, like continuing on, I've taken a little break now after the third book just because of Malazan, basically. Right. But I'm looking forward to Feast and Dance because I know there are more differences from the show, and there are some things that I already know just because of what's the phrase, osmosis.
Right.
And I'm just so jealous, and I guess there's a huge part of me that wishes that I could have read A Storm of Swords fresh for the first time without all of the baggage or any knowledge.
It was quite fun. Although I did accidentally spoil myself on the Red Wedding because I didn't know to not Google things when I was 17. So
yeah.
But other than that event, everything else was just bonkers. So
I have just accidentally spoiled myself on the first part of House of Chains. And
Tanner spoiled me on the end of House of Chains.
Damn it, Tanner.
It was totally my fault. I don't know if Tanner's gonna watch, but no, he put a spoiler bar, and I just like in my head thought it was Memories of Ice. I don't know what I thought, but I just clicked it, and it was the end. And I was like, oh
no, he put a spoiler bar. He did not spoil. You spoiled yourself, Kyle.
That is true.
Let's not throw Tanner under the bus here.
That happened to me with like multiple times, and I managed to not read it. You know, when you panic and just like throw your phone away. But multiple times I have clicked on spoiler bars for Robin Hood books because they all have the same.
They all are the same, and then people just initial them, and I'm like, oh. I have actually done that. There was one specifically on Jimmy's Discord. It was Jimmy's, and it was. I don't even know how to say this. It was something that happened in Fool's Errand, but it wasn't the spoiler itself. It was the feeling around the spoiler. So actually, he didn't even say anything but I just was like, I know what this is about. And I was right. And I mean, it's just a sad book.
That's, yeah. Sometimes the reaction to what people say is enough to tip you off.
Yeah. And I'm super not blaming Jimmy. He was I just clicked the wrong thing. It happens. But
yeah, I Googled a character name, and the Google search suggestions told me who that character is in House of Chains.
I was spoiled on that too, but I forgot how.
Right.
Now I will say that's probably a really sweet reveal. I don't know because I experienced it the same way you did,
Yeah.
but as somebody who has read House of Chains, I appreciated it because I had more context for what we were doing and why,
Okay.
which allowed
Okay.
me to enjoy those parts a little bit better. But I
Yeah.
do agree, and that's a thing about spoilers in general, that they're really difficult because you don't know how you would react to something without them. But a lot of people prioritize that shocking moment, and that's totally valid. But also,
Mm.
like, being able to understand the context of why you're going to read something also kind of helps too. So
Yeah.
I don't think it'll impact your enjoyment of House of Chains. House of Chains being not as good is what is going to impact your enjoyment.
Okay, cool. Nice.
I liked some of that book really, really well, and then some of it I didn't like at all. But
Okay.
it's definitely
I've
my least favorite so far. But I think you're gonna really like parts of it.
I've heard somewhat mixed things, and then I've heard people say, "Oh, I love House of Ch-" So yeah, the only one that I've heard sort of unanimously so far is Memories of Ice. Dead House Gates also has people that are like, "That's one of my least favorites," and that was
Bone
my
Hunters
favorite.
is pretty consistently near people's top or the top. That's what I'm
Cool.
really excited for. I'm gonna be reading Midnight Tides soon-ish, and a lot of people I trust put Midnight Tides at like near their top, so that's good. But I've heard that one is also a little divisive. So
I think that's also one that there's a
House of
whole new
Chains
cast
is
of
such
character.
a Kevin book, so this makes sense.
You know, I
Nice.
was just thinking in terms of being spoiled. Like, I definitely like want to know as little as possible about books going in, but not always. But occasionally, I find it almost worse to know there's a big twist at the end, or something
This
really
is
shocking happens at the
this is
end.
a Red Rising book I feel this way about. I won't even say which one to prevent.
Me too. So it might be the same one. Because I read the whole book up to the thing, knowing there was a big thing.
We're talking about the same book.
Yeah, that was like equated to, we've mentioned before, the Red Wedding, and then it happened, and I was like, oh.
I heard that, and I also heard someone say on a live stream, they were like, "Oh, like that book, like some people are their friends until they're not, or something like that." And but those two things, I was like, I know exactly what's happening at the end of this book.
That's a spoiler. Like, sometimes I feel like that is almost worse, because then you read the whole thing and you're like, I know a thing is going to happen, and then it makes it anticlimactic when it does. Whereas sometimes a specific plot spoiler, but not how it happens or when or in what context. So you still get a surprise, even though you know the thing. So like, sometimes it's actually worse to not have the information but get the feeling, if that makes sense.
I can agree with that. I think that ties into what Alan says about how people talk about like, oh, like I was
That
broken
broke
by
me.
the
Yeah.
ending. Yeah.
Yes.
I totally agree with that.
That is a spoiler, because then
totally
like
agree with that.
I feel like that also always ruins the experience, because you are less likely to make me cry or get me emotionally if I know you're trying to going in.
Yeah, I agree. Also, like the way people tend to phrase it, because like I've actually, I was talking about the Sarantine Mosaic recently with Sarah and Jake, and we were talking about how the end of that book made us all cry, and then we were like, but it's specifically not like the "it broke me" thing. It's just like the way that book is written in several different instances over several different reasons. It's just very emotionally evocative writing. But a lot of ways people talk about, they'll be like something like this. I'm going to use a series everyone should know about, and this is not a real spoiler, just in case you're unaware. But they'll be like, yeah, I was reading The Return of the King. It was such a great book. Aragorn was my favorite character. I love Aragorn. I would die for Aragorn. Aragorn is so cool. And then the end of the book, it broke me. It literally broke me. I was I'm like, okay, so Aragorn dies. Like, that's what that would be like. You're like, okay. Like, you can pretty much clearly telegraph what people are talking about.
Yeah.
I mean, it could also, in a sense, even if you are really loving the book and you don't know what's going to happen, it can still make a thing that happens that wasn't what you were expecting more underwhelming. So
Yeah.
like
Yes.
if it leads you to think of one thing and then that thing doesn't happen and it's something else, you're like, oh, but I was expecting,
It's
Yeah.
expectations.
Either way, it just messes with it.
Yeah. It sets
Yeah, that's
up
what we
every
get for
expectation.
even being on this platform, really.
We should
Although
just quit YouTube, quit Goodreads, like not engage
none
with
of us should
anybody.
even talk about books. We should just all read in a monastery somewhere. That way we can fully appreciate Malazan. We will turn into the planet of Malaz
Yeah.
through
Yeah.
sheer will of meditation.
Next live stream will just be me cooking potatoes and describing to you exactly how I made them. That is it. Oh, Colin says, just to play devil's
This
advocate.
is fair.
He said, oh, the Fools, all of the titles, they're so funny. Apprentice to the Fool of the Assassin.
I think it was Ben one time that was like, I don't know, I'm starting the next book, Fool's Fool or something. And I was just like, high quality joke.
Yeah.
It really is like they put like assassin and fool and quest and fate on a wheel and they just spin it every time and get a different color.
So my favorite band is Shinedown. Are either of you familiar with them?
No.
Okay, very good rock band. Check them out. But they have a new album out. The big single is "Symptom of Being Human," and in that song, they're like, "We're all passengers in the ship of fools," and then like all this stuff. So every time I listen to the song, it makes me think, I'm like, "Ship of Fools" is for sure the sequel that Robin Hobb is writing, where it's live ship and I'm like, for sure. And then because of that, I actually I recommend anybody who is a fan of Robin Hobb, like even if you don't want to listen to the song, read the lyrics, because once that made me think of Realm of the Elderlings, I actually pictured, because it's like a person writing a song to someone else about like it's okay that you have insecurities and you have anxiety and all this stuff, and like we're all weird. And I'm like, this is fully like the Fool writing to Fitz, and they for sure have not read that series. It's just me reading into it, but I think it really fits. But it's
Maybe
only because I doubt it. But every time I read Ship of Fools, I'm like, that has to be a Robin Hobb title.
One day we'll get one. I'm sure.
Kevin, my 18-year-old coworker's favorite band is Shinedown, so I will not have this. I will not have this from you. I know you're just trolling me. You like stupid.
That's because Kev is 12.
Kev is 12. He likes oh, what are they called? Why am I blanking on them? Kev, what's your favorite band? It's like a violent band. It's like they like horror. Why am I blanking on? Okay, we're gonna move on. But he knows what I'm talking about. How is the month of Philip going for you guys?
Well,
I really enjoyed Beowulf.
I have read Beowulf twice, Yolanda, and I did not like it either time. I don't understand it very well. So
thank you. And you read it twice? Wow. Okay. So we read it out loud together. So he read it because I was like, I'm not doing the epic poem thing.
I tried to perform it as best I could to make it more fun for her.
I struggled so much to concentrate because there's so... I mean, look, I didn't hate it. It was very interesting because there are things in there where you're like, oh, this is like the proto-trope for fantasy, which is fascinating. And some of it was genuinely fun, but there's so much like men telling each other how great they are. And then like, I'm going to go like fight this sea monster underwater with my fists.
He is, and I said this the other day when in one of the Discords, where he is the origin of the white man on Twitter who thinks that they can fight a grizzly bear and just talks about how like amazing they are and how tough they are. And like anytime there was a big battle scene or whatever, Beowulf would sit down and like reminisce like the Giga Chad that he is. And like, you know that meme of the like wolf that's sitting at the tree, just kind of like this? Just that.
Yeah.
He just a dude, bro, sitting down and then reminisces about all the good like glory hunting fighting that he did as a young man. And I'm like, I could leave all of that because all of that we've already read. Anyway, it was written 1,000 years ago, so like
an interesting one to read, definitely. But
if it makes you feel better, Jake just DNF'd the Iliad. So it's not a good month for epic poetry in the fantasy community.
I still enjoyed Beowulf.
I liked his review of DNFing it, which is an all-timer because he's like, I think it would have been better if, and then he stops. He's like, who am I to criticize?
Yeah,
you know, the most famous novel of all time, but I think it would have been.
Yeah.
I read Beowulf in 10th grade English, and I'm not confident that it was all of it. I know we had to read it. And I don't remember, like, I had major depression in 10th grade, so I basically don't remember that year. I remember nothing about that time reading. I just know that I had to. So when you talk about stuff, I'm like, maybe. And then I listened to it on audio a couple years ago, and I thought the narrator was really boring. So that didn't help either. Yeah. So I do actually want to give it, like, a full adult eye on the page try at some point. But I'm like, I've read this twice and bounced off of it, so I don't know how I'm going to feel.
There's so much stuff that is from there in Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
That's just in everything that fantasy fans like in modern stuff. There are things in there that I see in like John Gwynn's Shadow of the Gods. I appreciated it more than enjoyed the experience of reading it. But I actually found Heaney's translation to be quite readable and fun when Beowulf is not sitting down talking about how great he is, you know?
Yeah, it was definitely really easy to follow. Although I'm saying this as somebody who wasn't following like 30% of the time, because like you'd be like, so he's fighting the sea monster, and I was like, there's a sea monster, because I just blanked out for like 15 seconds and missed the fact that there was a sea monster. So like and
I was like, underwater with his fists.
Underwater can mean lots of things. Maybe he has a Pepsi glass and he put his fist in it. You know, who knows?
Yeah, it's look, I am glad that we read it. It's an interesting one, but definitely not an all-time favorite. But that's the only thing I've read so far, because I have to read my Crime Book Club book, which I started late, so I have to like power through that. But that's on Thursday, and then I'll get properly into it.
I'm also reading The Grapes of Wrath with Evie at the moment, so I actually haven't started another Philip book, but I will do. Obviously, House of Chains I'll start maybe towards the middle of the month. But I will try to read Mark Lawrence's new book maybe in the next few days.
I'm hearing it's good. I've been hearing it's even more confusing than the first one. So I'm like, great.
The first one was quite confusing in itself as well. So yeah, cool. So that's it.
I think I'm going to start with the 5th season.
Nice.
Is that a Philip book, or is that just say you want to read a book?
A Philip book, so like not an obvious Philip book probably for most people, but he did a review with his daughter on his channel a couple of years ago, and we had recently found the book, and it just stuck with me. And now every time I look at it on the shelf, I think of Philip's review with his daughter, because I thought that was really like a cool thing to do, really cute. So I associate it with Philip. So I think that's going to be my first one. I'll probably start that on like Thursday or Friday.
Nice.
And then I'll also read Mark Lawrence. I feel like Red Sister is more of a Philip sold me on it thing, but I want to read Emperor of Thorns because I want to finish the trilogy, but I feel like that's kind of cheating. So
I think he just likes Mark Lawrence a lot. I think any of them are solid. Emperor of Thorns was really good. I liked it. Not as much as King. I think King was my favorite of the three.
I agree.
It's been a long time, so I might change my mind on reread. 5th season, my wife has a close friend, and she is the only friend that I have that has carte blanche borrowing books, except for like special editions and signed stuff. Mm-hmm. Normally, I only loan out books to people if they're like a book I don't really care about, or if I have like extra copy or something, because people are just savages. But she's built trust over a long period of time, so she can borrow any book that we own as long as it's not a special edition or signed. And she doesn't read fantasy, so that like, And I finally was like, you should really try. Like, I think you would like a fantasy book. Like, I really like you're just being biased. Like, give it a shot. She's like, I will read one fantasy book. And I thought about it for a long time based on what she likes, and I was like, I think you will like. And I gave her two options: Jade City or the Fifth Season. And I explained how they're both really different, but I think she might like both. And she chose the Fifth Season, so I loaned that out to her as her first fantasy book, maybe ever. I think she maybe read Harry Potter when she was a teenager. So we will see how that goes.
Cool.
Ooh, that's cool. That's such responsibility, but that's really cool. I enjoy doing that kind of thing. Like, like thinking about pitching something a little bit more difficult of like, this is a person that isn't sold on the genre.
Yeah, so I would not normally pick Fifth Season for someone's first fantasy book. I picked it for her because she does like to really like think and digest what's going on, and she reads a lot. So I think the structure of Fifth Season, I would not start with. It's more that she has a bias that fantasy isn't like worthwhile. So I wanted to show her. I was like, N.K. Jemisin thinks otherwise.
Yeah.
But I really, really like Fifth Season, so I hope you like it. But if you don't, you can join Belltube, who did not like it at all. Belltube and Josh did not like it. So,
have you read the entire trilogy? Because I've heard that people are mixed on like the other two.
I agree with the consensus that the first book is the best one. That's generally the opinion. But I also really like the third one. And I think a lot of people do still really like the third one, just maybe like the first is the favorite. I do think the second one is fine.
I think
it should have been the duology. I think you could have applied 20% of the second book to each of the other two books and cut 60% of the second one, and it would have been stronger. But I don't think it's bad. I just think it is doing a lot of middle book syndrome stuff to me personally.
Right.
So.
Yeah.
I speak truth for once, Evie says. Well, okay, when I like the spear cuts through water, Evie, then that'll be the second time.
It's gonna be real awkward when we do the month of Evie, and I don't like spear cuts through water.
I think that will be the moment we quit BookTube.
Yeah,
you don't even have to just quit BookTube. You have to get a wig, and Yolanda has to shave her head. It would be really, really good if you guys got a bunch of face tattoos to really hide who you are, and then you just have to move countries. So
yeah,
that's fine then. It's like BookTube witness protection.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, from Evie's wrath.
And it's like I am confident that I would like it, but there's so many things being said about it of like, oh, it's so unusual or whatever. Like that just sounds like a book that could work for you or it couldn't.
I am not looking at anything. I actually know nothing about it.
Oh, I just see when people like write reviews in Discords. I'm like, oh, this person really loved it. Oh, this person.
The amount of
really
people that I've seen talk about it, I actually know almost, and I read, like I listened to the first like maybe 7% of it on audio before realizing, nope. I still actually have no idea what it's about. Like there's a grandfather, I think maybe, and that's like all I know. And I'm like, good, I'll just experience it.
Yeah, I'm looking forward just to the fact that it sounds so different, you know?
Yeah, I think I'm going to try to read it this month. It might bleed over into June, but I do want to read it really soon. Evie is going to make sure we're all safe, even if we don't like it. You guys do these month of people things, and I think that those are your best videos. I've actually flirted with the idea of doing a like a video where I just impersonate other booktubers. Like that's just the whole video. And you guys doing it has inspired me to actually maybe do it someday because I'm like, man, it's so fun because you just like see people's like tics and mannerisms and like your Philip laugh is just, man, I love it.
Yeah.
And the Kev video was also fantastic.
It's very fun. It's the thing that I was initially slightly worried about, and it's we didn't necessarily, like I didn't go out and impersonate Alan, although I kind of could have. In the Alan video, we more just said what he says.
Yeah, we're going deeper with each one.
Because I think people know that it's all in good fun, and it's with like it coming from a place of appreciation and love, not like I am just ripping into.
You started with Alan, right?
Yeah.
See, Alan was always going to be down for that joke.
Yeah.
You got to start with people who know that they're going to be
Yeah.
Exactly. And then you have built like this is just a thing that we do. We're not picking on anybody. But the thing with the Alan one was that we were going to do a month of Alan before we even had a channel. Like, because, and it all originated from like him having such niche series and hills that he'll die on for those series, that and he's so enthusiastic that we were like, oh my god, we have bought so many books purely because of Alan's recommendations that other people seem to not like. So we were like, let's just do a month. Wouldn't it be fun if we do a month of Alan and we just do? So we were just gonna like share it on Discord, and then we created the channel, and you said, why don't we do a video for it? And I was really nervous about it, thinking, yeah, like, is this gonna come across the right way? And like, we made the thumbnail and we sent the thumbnail to a couple of people being like, is this okay? Like, is Alan gonna think this is funny? Like,
because we put in the thumbnail really over the top YouTube expressions, and also, will these books be worse than being hit by a car?
It was right after he uploaded his major changes.
It was also right after
major change.
It was also right after he actually got hit by a car.
Yeah.
Yeah, but for anybody who doesn't know, that was the joke that Alan started making, is that he's going to do a review as whether or not a book is worse than getting hit by a car. So
yeah. So, but we were like, it could look really bad. Like, we're not making fun of somebody being hit by a car, obviously, but we were just like going off of his joke. So yeah, like, I was a bit nervous about it, but then obviously no reason to. It was so fun, and now it just allows us to get so creative with kind of imitating the style of each.
No, Evie, because I can't read 35 books in a month.
I was gonna say, this will just be them disagreeing with people. Like, it'll just be a video of them going on Discord and being like, this person's wrong.
That would be genius.
The most random collection of books ever, just like one in each genre and nonfiction, and like just a bit of everything.
Yeah. No, actually, I would try to, like, something like that. Then I would get creative and do like, oh, I'm going to audio a bunch of stuff this month and really give audio a go.
Yeah.
But
I am an audio defender, so that makes sense.
Yeah, and for like the Philip thing, we were discussing as well for the wrap up to maybe do an impression of AP, like hijacking the video in the wrap up. And I started teaching you like how to do a Belfast accent.
I'm trying to, because I like
people with accents are the ones that make me nervous. Because I'm like, I don't want to come across like I'm stereotyping or their accent or something. Like when I put it, I made a list and I started watching videos. This is when I was making videos more of people who I feel like have enough like specific things they say and specific ways that they do, like ways that you could, poke fun at it while making it clearly just like in good fun. And one of the people I put on there was Patrick, and I just I had to take it off because I was like, I just feel like if I start trying to imitate, it's going to come off really bad. But I'm like, and I'm like, but Patrick does a lot of like very specific Patrick things that I would like to make fun of, and in a harmless way, like how he I don't know if you guys have noticed this. Patrick will rank the books that he's read in extremely specific ways, and it just gets me every time. I'd be like, so I read this book. This is the 6th best book I've ever read. It features a dragon riding roller skates, but it is the 3rd best book I have ever read.
I love that.
That is featuring a red moon, and I'm just like, I love that you just get this specific.
Yeah, this is the 3rd best book set in a magic school that I read on a Tuesday.
For sure, yeah.
I think to this day, my favorite Patrick video is the one where he was just ranting about the changes in the Dandelion Dynasty edition.
Salty Patrick is the greatest.
And he's like, why? Why? And he just leaves the dead air. I love it. It's
every
so good.
Time something like that happens now and I complain to somebody about it, I think of that video. Like, I reference that to my coworkers and they don't know what I'm talking about, but I'm just like, why?
Yeah,
I think it's like when anybody is known for being really nice, I think when they get like a little ranty or salty, it has more weight.
Yeah.
You're just like, wow, this person means it with their heart.
Yeah. But no, do it. It's really fun.
Well, Jake, Yours is a lot of hand waving and stats. I'll just put that out there.
So Jake does a thing where he sort of half gets up out of the chair a lot.
Yeah, for sure. And he goes like this with his hair. Like,
Yeah.
you can tell both Carlos and I have studied acting because it's the mannerisms. You got to really make sure that you.
Yeah, and Jake is a lot of like hands up here, like up high, and like then getting out of the chair and just being real hyped. So hype. Anyway, we'll do it one day, Jake.
Yeah, no, it's fun. Like, it's this community is really, really good for like, you know, us all being friends and stuff. But there's like certain aspects of friendship that are like a little hard to replicate because we're all seeing each other through these little screens. And I think something like that is just a really fun way of like showing your appreciation for someone. I'm talking more specifically about you guys doing like a whole video month, but also just impressions of them is fun. Yeah. Because it's like this person has really impacted your TBR and like your reading life. And I think it's really nice you guys do that. And also the person who I think has sold me on the most amount of books that I wouldn't have read otherwise is Jimmy. Because Jimmy just like, I think Jimmy's strategy for finding books sometimes is to just walk into a bookstore and be like, give me your weird shit. He just finds stuff I've never heard of. And it's because, you know, he gets tons of recommendations and stuff. But I have a lot of books that the only person I've ever seen review them is Jimmy. So
so
I should probably do
on one of our wrap-ups recently asking, where do you find all these books? And I just had to answer honestly, and I was like, I literally just go into the bookshop and just look around at the like what they recommend on the tables, what's recommended on like what you recommend with your little like, what do you call them, shelf talkers, or in these like Discords and online communities where there's like niches of people reading real specific shit. Just find it that way.
I think that's a really interesting subject for conversation, like, because we are all so in the book community that we all talk to each other or like, you know, about books all the time. And like for me, I studied literature, so all my college friends like were huge readers. My family are readers. Now here, like the BookTube community, huge readers. I work in a bookshop, so like I am talking about books constantly. So I get recommendations constantly. I cannot manage the amount of recommendations I get. But people that aren't surrounded by other readers or people that want to get into reading often have no idea where to start or how to pick or get one book. Oh, I liked it. How do I pick the next book?
Absolutely.
And you need to like kind of learn how to source books for yourself, like through recommendations, like even like a bookstore, like how do you browse a bookstore? Because you walk into any like Waterstones or Barnes & Noble, they're huge. Where do you start? How do you sort something that might be to your taste or not to your taste? Like, I kind of do that instinctively.
There's so much. It was the biggest factor in me ever finding new authors for years. I would reread like Harry Potter, A Song of Ice and Fire, Lord of the Rings, just constantly, and maybe like throw in one other book. But it's just difficult to. And then I had a friend the other day. She's like on the 4th last book, and she's like, you know, I don't think I like this series. And I'm like, oh yeah, okay. Why is that? And she's like, well, I don't like romance, and I don't like teenage stuff, and I just find that like there's too many characters that I don't care about. And she's like, basically, it ended up being that she dislikes the entire premise of the series. I'm like, well, why did you read until the 4th book? And she's like, my friend really liked them, and she just like gave them to me. And I was like, okay, well, let me help. So I asked her a few questions about what she wanted to read, and I gave her The Shining by Stephen King.
Nice.
And the first Mistborn book. So we will see if I have better recommendations than her random friend just being like, read this.
Sometimes I find a good question is asking what movies do people like.
Yeah.
I always start that way. Unless they're a big reader, then you know it's easier. But if somebody's like, oh, I read a couple books a year, I don't know. And I'm like, what are some of your favorite movies? And then I usually ask them to ask why. And even that, people have a really hard time answering sometimes, because a lot of people don't really consider why they like a thing. I'm like, the key to recommending things to yourself is to know what you like, even if it's a vague sense of why you like it. Yeah. And I think even just asking them that question, I think makes them get a little better at it. So,
Yeah, I get this in work all the time. Like customers will come in, and it's such an interesting exercise to learn how to recommend books to random strangers within like 5 to 10 minutes. People come in and they're like, I like this book. What should I read next? So like first, unless I'm like super familiar with the book, but even then, like, what did you like about it? And if they're not sure, oh, I just enjoyed it, I just want something like fun or whatever. Yeah, what movies do you like? What other authors have you read? Like, just get a bit of a sense. Like, somebody asked me, this is a few months ago, somebody wanted like something similar to Oscar Wilde.
Oh yeah, this is a ridiculous question.
But yeah, this is like a very edge case. But somebody wanted, I think he just said something similar to Oscar Wilde, like first, and I was like, okay, so like, what about Oscar Wilde? Like, do you want another Irish classic? Do you want another classic in general? Like, what is it about Oscar Wilde that you like? And he was like, I think he presents the ridiculousness of Irish society very well, and like the humor of it. But I don't really want anything else Irish. I want like something Oriental. And I was like, so you want the ridiculousness of Irish society, but like Oriental? Okay.
I actually think I kind of know what this person means, but they don't know how to say what they mean.
That's
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Like you want like a
I'm gonna go turn a light on.
Yeah, like a humorous critique of society and like of the little things
in Asia.
But in Asia, so they wanted an Oriental Oscar Wilde, but like that's the kind of thing. Like something like Oscar Wilde could mean anything, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like also, which Oscar Wilde did you read? Like, do you want something like mildly supernatural and creepy, like Picture of Dorian Gray? Do you want something witty, like what? So it's just. I find that so fun. Like I love it when friends are like, I don't read a lot, but like, what should I pick up? Or like, you read a lot of fantasy, which one should I like give a go?
I tell my coworkers and my friends too, but they already know that I know a lot of books because like at work I'm a bartender, so like there's just not a lot of talk about books in a bar. There's just not.
Yeah.
So over time, people are like, Kyle knows a lot of books. And I've told them, I'm like, I guarantee a lot of them don't read. And I've told every single one, not every single one of them, every time this comes up in a sense of like recommendations, I'm like, I guarantee any of you that are talking about this, I can recommend you a book that you will like within 3 books, as long as you participate in good faith. Because a lot of them are like, I've never read a book that I really liked. And I'm like, I can fix that. Like, I promise you I can fix that. If you I can ask you a few questions, and I can give you a first recommendation. That might not be a hit because this is a pretty new experience. But then if you actually like read that book and explain to me why you don't like it, I think I'll hit on the second. And I promise you I will do it in the 3rd book. And I've gotten a few of them to try. A couple of them are on their 1st book. One girl's really liking Jade City. So I am trying to get some people into this kind of stuff. Also, real quickly to respond to Anton, he says, I find I have different tastes in movies from books, though.
That's a good point.
I think that is like definitely possible, and that is true. But I would guess, without knowing what you're talking about, if we really drill down, there's more similarities than you probably are giving credit to, but maybe not. It is okay to totally appreciate a different style of thing in a different medium. I just find a lot of things like I don't read or I don't watch a lot of fantasy and sci-fi TV shows. Like on the surface, The Wire is nothing like fantasy. Yeah. However, I find things that I love about The Wire in a lot of things that I read. Greenbone Saga, I'm like, no, this is not like The Sopranos. This is like The Wire. Malazan, the number one thing Malazan reminds me of is The Wire. And there's no magic in The Wire. But if you've read one and watched the other, you understand why I feel that way. And so there's a lot of like reasons why somebody would like something that's a little bit more deeper than like, oh, I watch crime fiction, but I read sci-fi or something like that. But I don't know what your specific tastes are. So,
yeah, I think like at least it gives you like a latching on point to go from. Like if somebody loves I don't know, Interstellar, for example, just trying to come up with a sci-fi movie that isn't Star Wars. If somebody says like, I really like Interstellar, at least it'll be like, okay, so you're open to science fiction. They might like turn out to then go like, oh, actually, you know what? I like the aesthetics in movie form, but I don't want to read about it. Fair enough.
Yeah,
but at least they'll be open to try a science fiction book. Whereas if somebody's like, I hate Star Wars, I hate spaceships, I like don't like any. Okay,
My dad.
Your dad, yeah.
Do you ever
Yeah,
take that as a
exactly.
challenge? Because I take that as a challenge. Although it's your job, I probably wouldn't take it as a challenge if it was my job. But when people are like, I don't want to read anything like this, I'm like, what do you?
But maybe
it depends on the customer, because sometimes people say that, but they might be open to a pitch. Whereas other people you might annoy if you like keep
For
going.
sure.
They're just like, leave me alone. I want to like read my thing. So you kind of gauge like, but yeah, like I had a like some customers are just so fun because they just go with whatever you give them and just trust you, especially before Christmas. But like even I had a pregnant woman recently who was like browsing around the sci-fi fantasy section, and I was like, "Oh, can I help you find anything?" And she was like, "I just want a recommendation. I haven't read a ton of fantasy, but I like it. I like what I've read. I'm open to science fiction. I'm open to long series. Actually, if it's a long series, better. I'm pregnant. I'm at home. I just need a distraction." And I was like, "Great." And I just was chatting to her, and like based on how she was reacting to what I was pitching, I would then go to the next one. And she bought like everything I gave her. She was like, "Yeah, cool." And I was like, "These are very different from each other. Perfect. I'll give them all a go." And I was like, "Can you come in every day, please?"
Yeah.
But those are obviously fun because there are people that are like, I know what I want, but I'm willing to try different things.
Yeah.
Within that.
But I guess it's just like also asking that question is how open are you to going outside your wheelhouse? Like,
yeah,
with my dad, don't give him anything with spaceships. He just, it's like there is a wall that goes up. But one of his favorite writers is Bernard Cornwell. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to try on something here, Dad. Give it a go. He still has not read it. But I bought him Malice because I thought, yeah, this is probably, there's not too much silly magic and lizards like flying around, like my dad would say. There's none of that nonsense.
has he read A Song of Ice and Fire?
No, he will never read A Song of Ice and Fire. I
Why?
assure you of that.
Because of dragons, lizards?
Yeah,
because, well, first of all, he watched
I'm built different. I would take this as a challenge. If it was somebody that was close to me that wouldn't actually, like for my dad, I would for sure take it because I'm like, I see the pathway already. You start him on Malice, and then you get him hooked on that, and then you're like, Dad, it's basically just this. But also, instead of the lizards, they don't ride the lizards only on the ground. Sometimes the lizards go in the air. That's the only difference, Dad. And I feel like I would take this as a challenge. But I totally get it. Like some people just don't want to read like a certain.
Yeah, and it's also just like, depending on your mood, like, oh, Dad, how open are you to like a little bit of hand waving going on in this mostly historical fantasy series, you know? But they don't only ride lizards on the ground. Yeah. Not in the way that comment is phrased. Get your mind out of the gutter.
You can sometimes trick people into reading stuff that they wouldn't usually read, though, because you can just like conveniently pitch it in a way that is not true, and like pitch it in with all the stuff that you think they would genuinely like, and then like omit the trigger word, like, you know, and then like they read it and then they're 400 pages in and really liking it, and oh no, there's a dragon. Oh, but I was like, you know, so like you can.
Yeah.
I'm also just way more likely to respect it if they've tried it at all. Like if you're like, I've read this and I just don't like it, I'm like, that's fair. Like, nobody has to like anything. But I think having like a strong, like, I would never read anything that ever has a lizard that is bigger than real lizards in it. I'm just like, that is a really hard line. And I think you should give a slightly bigger lizard a chance.
Yes. I'm going to say exactly that the next time I'm talking to my old man. I think you
Sounds
should
good.
give slightly bigger lizards a chance.
There are just some people that have oddly strong lines against very specific things.
Fantastical
Like
things.
there wasn't there like, I think you told me about this, like, was it like a colleague of your mom's or something that was a huge reader, huge literary fiction reader, but refused to read anything longer than 250 pages?
Yeah.
It's almost as crazy as only reading first person.
It's so odd. But to give it to the person who only reads stuff in first person, at least that person has the level of literacy to know that I like this perspective of narration. That's interesting.
I know that you're giving them that credit, but I know the person, and I promise you they didn't.
Okay.
They read 2 pages of a book that was in third person. They're like, I don't understand how to deal with this. And
okay, right. Okay, well, I take it back.
But I appreciate your open-mindedness.
But this person, we were at like a dinner with like me and my parents, and we were at this dinner with a bunch of random people. And this guy, real like pretentious, probably wearing like a satin scarf at the table or something, was talking about how he was like super into literature, and like my mom reads a lot, so that's why I read, pretty much. And my mom also reads quite broadly, like she likes a lot of different things. Trying to get her to read A Song of Ice and Fire and Hob, because she would definitely like those.
Yeah.
But she didn't like the Game of Thrones show, so she's dubious. But anyway, this guy...
You gotta show her Bookborn's videos. That's what you gotta do. I showed my wife those videos, and she says she might actually read A Song of Ice and Fire now. So.
Nice. But this guy was just being extremely pretentious and saying, oh yeah, like just books give you so much. They talk so much about, they expand your mind to whatever, blah, 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 blah. And my mom was asking, oh yeah, like what kind of books do you like? Have you read such and such, whatever? She threw out a couple of examples, don't remember what. And he's like, oh, no. That book is over 200 pages. And she was like, what? Oh yeah, I only read books that are 200 pages or less. There's no need for a book to be over 200 pages. And I was like, or my mom was like, look, I can understand an argument like that for talking about a book that's like over 1,000 pages. But
I understand having preferences and saying
that's like 80% of literature.
Read short books. Like I prefer if books are under 200 pages. But to have a hard line is bizarre to me.
Refusing,
especially a very low hard line. Like I only read 36-page novellas, or it's just too long.
Yeah,
like.
Well, especially if for a person who was wanting to like study literature, or like maybe was some kind of critic or something. Yeah. Anyway,
weird,
bizarre.
I don't
like. I feel like classics tend to not. Well, okay, that's not true. There's plenty of short classics, but there's also a lot of classics that are like 600 pages.
Yeah. So like, does he refuse to read Dostoevsky?
But like even just stuff that's 300 pages. Nope.
Yeah, I'm just gonna pitch this guy Stormlight Archive, but I'm gonna rewrite Stormlight Archive handwritten and just tiny little notes. I'll get it in at $1.99.
Yeah.
Just make it a really like large format book, So like it's 200 pages. It's 199 pages. It's just like the pages are bigger.
Evie, Frankenstein is not 119 pages. It's like 250, at least in my edition.
Yeah, and again, page count is so variable because it's really about word count.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. The e-reader revolution is really going to mess this guy up because it could be whatever you want it to be.
I actually think that was before like the e-reader revolution.
That was decades ago. Is he we check in on this person.
with Disquiet Gods, this hardcover edition is it's a reasonably big book. It's like 670-ish pages maybe, which is a big chunky boy. But the ebook version is like 1,100 pages, like on the little thing that it says. And I had that first, and I was like, this is a really big book. So I was reading it on that, and when I got the physical version finally, I went to like put my bookmark in the right spot, and it just looks way more reasonable being like, oh, I'm on page 250 of 700 than, 310 of 1,000. And I'm like, man, the Kindle numbers are way different.
Do you find, I don't know if you read a lot on an e-reader, but do you find that you forget that you've read certain books if you've read them on an e-reader?
No. I mean, I read on e-readers, but I don't often forget. Someone said to me recently that, because I just turned 30 not that long ago, and someone was like, well, it's a while ago now, but thank you. I meant recently, like this year. And he was like, you have about like 5 years before you start watching a movie and getting halfway through it and thinking, I've already seen this movie. And I'm like, not only do I guarantee you that is not true, how dare you insinuate that my memory is not good enough to remember that I've seen a movie before?
I might get there myself because my own father is like that. And I brought it up because there are a number of books that I don't remember if I've read, but think I have read because I read them mostly on an e-reader as a teenager.
That's super interesting.
And it happened to me like with the most recent example was Mystic River, actually, which I couldn't remember if I actually read the last part of the book, because I remember as a teenager seeing the movie and then really wanting to read the book and then reading the book. But I used to do this thing with, I'd borrow an e-reader, read the thing and think, this is amazing, and keep going. But certain books I would just then park and move on to the next one. But you reading it reminded me, oh yeah, totally read this book. And it's one of my favorites.
I do so many extraneous things around reading or watching something that's just not going to happen to me. Like maybe when I'm like really old and I've had all the years of reading and watching things, but it doesn't happen to me for several reasons. I always log it in Goodreads, which the act of doing so, even if I don't like look it up, just like doing that helps me remember. If it's a movie or a book that's like has any sort of public available knowledge, I always look up stuff about it after I'm done. Like I always go to the Wikipedia page of any movie I've ever watched. I just always do that. So, and that's because I'm really interested in the industry. I'm interested in actors, interested in production, all that kind of stuff. So I want to know all that stuff. In books, I'm interested in like things about the author. I'm interested in like whether or not it's a series or any like extraneous. So like I always do some sort of thing that's going to reinforce that I've read it. Now there are books from before I started doing all that I don't like. I remember in high school we had like a reading time, and I just picked a random book out of the library, and it was some like sci-fi dystopian book that was like 200 pages, and I blew through it in a day. And then I went back and I got the next one and I blew through it, and then I think I read 3 or 4 of them and I really liked them, and they were just like pulpy, like these guys fighting in an apocalyptic wasteland thing. And I have never been able to find out what that series was. I've looked it up several times. I have no idea. It's just lost to the ether. And one day someone will be like, you should read this series. They're just kind of like fun, short, pulpy reads. And I'll pick one up and I'll be, I've read this series. The only thing I remember about it is there was a character named Geronimo. It's the only thing I remember. If anybody's ever read anything like this and it sounds familiar, please let me know.
No.
I don't think so, but I'll keep that in mind.
I like the Goodreads thing. So I don't track everything on Goodreads, and I was inconsistent with Goodreads for years, even when I had it. So there's a lot of things that I've read that I haven't rated on Goodreads or added. But in the last few years, especially since 2020, when we had time to sit down and do whatever, I started again like tracking it like religiously. And that does help with like remembering all the things that you've read.
They're rituals. Like I think that's such a great point. Like it's completely different if you're picking up a random book, reading it by yourself, and then putting it away again. You have nobody to talk to about it. Like, but if you're buying a book, you're reading it, you're logging it. We like also track on like a Google sheet with like a bunch of other data.
Like our text.
So you're logging it, and then you're talking to people about it as you're reading it. You're talking to people you finish about it. Maybe you make a video. So like you're
That's the other
engaging with
thing.
it more
Yeah.
actively.
Making a video about it is really
Reading was
And
such a solitary experience before. If I wasn't reading something that, say, my parents would have also read, and then we're talking about it, like none of my friends read
right.
in real life, in non-virtual life. So it often happened that I would like borrow my mother's e-reader, tear through a couple of books that she got that were given to her by my uncle, or like he would download stuff, and I'm like, I tear through a bunch of stuff. So like I knew that Dennis Lehane was one of my favorite writers, that I'd read a couple of his books. Mystic River stuck in my memory, but then his other series, like the Kenji and Gennaro, like they're sort of more stereotypical detective novels. I know I've read 2 of them. I'm pretty sure they're the first 2. I remember vaguely what happened. I don't remember which one was which. That kind of thing happens to me with e-reader stuff. But since starting using Goodreads and like going in and like looking at the blurbs and adding them to here and adding them to that, and then reading it and adding that you're currently reading, and then clicking that finish button, it does something that I now read.
There's also a dopamine level to it,
totally,
which
totally.
you're gonna remember it a little bit better with that
Yeah.
hit. Whereas, I mean, you would naturally get a dopamine rush from finishing a book no matter what, but it's just an extra. You're like, oh, now I get to log it as finished, and that is why crossing things off lists to get things done is a fact. Like it is tapping into our psychology to do things that way.
Yeah.
And so I naturally have a good memory, and I always have. But there's also like memory is a passion of mine. I studied psychology in school, and then within all of that stuff, like specifically cognitive and memory stuff, is what I like the most. So I've read a lot about it, like even just not in school.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of strategies that I do now when I read that are so subconscious to me because I've been doing them for years now, that it's really easy for me to remember lots of things about what I read. And it's why it drives me nuts. People see that I read like 25 books a month or whatever it is, and they're like, you just any comment where somebody's like, you can't remember all that. I'm like, first of all, you don't remember all that you read either. But second of all, I probably remember more than you think. And there's lots of little strategies that you can incorporate over time to be able to just remember books 10% better. And that 10% matters a lot when discussing it or thinking back on the experience. Like whenever I meet a character in a book and I read their name, I associate that name to some other thing. And that association just is going to help. And so a very, very easy example is there's a character that's a really big dude in Stormlight Archive, and his name is Brock. Can you guess what I associated him with? Dwayne Johnson. It's very, very easy. That's a very simple example. But I do that with any character whose name isn't just like a jumble of anybody from Marine in A Song of Ice and Fire. I don't do that with. But most characters. And that creates an association to remember who that character is and like in a context. And when you first start doing that, it's really difficult. You have to stop yourself. You have to be like, okay, this character's name is, Vin. Vin is like Vin Diesel. So if I remember Vin Diesel, but in like, you have to be more intentional about it. But if you do it over time, you just kind of do it immediately. And so you remember, and you can do that with plots, you can do that with locations, and then you remember books way better. So your memory is not static like people tend to think it is. A lot of people poorly understand their own memory, and they're really self-defeating about it. They'll be like, I don't remember things very well.
Yes.
I'm like, I just don't believe you. I just think you've told yourself that your whole life. So then as soon as you don't remember something, you're like, oh, I don't remember things very well. And I'm like,
do you then have similar tricks for audiobooks? Because I always tell myself, oh, I can't really pay attention to audiobooks. But then again, I don't necessarily try all that hard.
Yeah, so we're getting into what is my biggest rant, which is learning styles are not a thing. This is a myth. Anybody who tells you it's not a myth are wrong. There's no evidence to suggest this. Anybody who doesn't believe me, anybody who thinks my teacher told me that, go Google it right now. I promise you there's not evidence. This is a lie perpetuated by bad science that has been thoroughly debunked in current media. Like, I mean, there always is a chance that new studies could come out and then we can get, but learning styles is a thing that was perpetuated and then it's easily reinforced. So what I mean by that is when kids are kids, let's say you're listening to a teacher talk and they're talking about something that is naturally interesting to you. Let's say Chinese history, because it's what I liked as a kid. And then you're going to listen to Chinese when they're talking about Chinese history. And you're like, wow, I learned that so easily. So then the next time you want to learn something, you're going to think, oh, I listened to my teacher talk and it was really interesting to me. So I'll listen to that again. And over time, these little interactions, you build up an idea that you learn better by auditory. And then what will happen is the opposite will also happen. So there'll be a time where a teacher's telling you to write something out or to watch a video or whatever it might be, and you don't really care about the material, or you're distracted or you're tired that day. And you will then not learn. So then you're like, well, I don't read, or I don't learn very well from reading. So then it becomes this thing over time. And then because you do that, you reinforce to the point where you're an adult and you tell yourself, yeah, I just can't listen to things. That's just not true. Like you now don't even extend the effort because you've been telling yourself your whole life that this is, like, every single study says that this is not real. So with that in mind, it's really easy to break out of if you want to. If you want to continue doing that, that's fine. Like, there's a reason that it becomes easy because now you've conditioned yourself.
And then you're talking about preference afterwards as well. Yeah,
for sure. So it's totally fine to have a preference. It's when people think that they can't do it. That is when I have a problem. I'm like, I promise you, if you give it a chance, you can. Like, you're defeating yourself beforehand. With audio, I actually struggle a lot with names because all of my strategies for learning names come from how I've learned names by reading them physically my whole life.
Yeah.
So I have to actively fight against this. There are several things I do. None of them work very well for me because I've been fighting it for a long time. The number one thing I prefer to do is look in the physical book. If I have it available, I will make sure that I learn the names physically. And then once I have them, I'm good. But I just have to be more intentional. So I listen to books fast. We all know this. It's usually about 2.8 tends to be my speed. And when they're introducing a lot of characters, I will slow it down and I will reverse and make sure I learn the name. And I'll usually say it out loud to myself if I can, or just visualize how it is written because I know that helps me. And then once I have the names down, then we're good to go. Yeah. And if you don't want to extend that effort, that is totally valid. I want to be clear. It's just that I believe in you more than you believe in yourself, and not you, Carlos, but you, the person who thinks that they can't do it. So I would just encourage anybody who has the idea that they can't listen to audiobooks to maybe just give themselves a little bit more credit.
Cool. Now, could you write all of that down for me, please? Because I learned by reading. Sorry.
Yeah, for sure. No, that was good. No. But yeah, I used to work with a teacher who swore up and down that learning styles were a thing. And I'm like, it's not true. So now it riles me up. It didn't used to. I just used to be a fun fact. Did you know? But she was adamant, and it just now it triggers me.
Really, really interesting, and I think that's a fascinating conversation to have. That just derailed me, Evie. I don't know where I was going.
It also, it's like it I guess perpetuates over the thing of what you're used to. So I had always thought, okay, I need to learn by doing something. So I need to do the thing, make the mistakes, and then, like, by association or by repetition, then okay, I know to do it. Like kinetic learning.
Kinetic, yeah. And to bounce off that, because that's another aspect of this. Some things it's only possible, or at least strongly encouraged, that is the way you learn that thing. Like changing your oil on a car, I could probably tell 100 people how to do it without them seeing a car, and then they go do it, and maybe 5 of those 100 people would be able to figure it out, like without any other information.
Yeah.
But doing it is much, so like then you get the thing that's like, I'm really good at doing things with my hands, and it's like, no, like you have to learn how to do it that way. So it's all a bunch of things that we trick ourselves into, the stories that we tell ourselves about who we are. That's really
very interesting.
That is very interesting. I remembered what I was going to say, like, because I think what you were saying about association is really interesting. I'm definitely going to try that, especially in fantasy where you get so many characters introduced sometimes at the same time. But that reminded me of, so I don't audio a lot. I used to audio a lot when I was a kid because I would have an audiobook on my CD player all the time.
I didn't even know they made them as CDs. I thought it was cassettes to digital. So
yeah, and I don't know if this is a very German thing. So I lived in Germany when I was a kid at like this time, and audiobooks are extremely popular in Germany. So I had all the Harry Potters. I had like Cornelia Funk, who is a German kids writer, like middle grade, and like had all of her books on audiobook, and then a bunch of other ones. So I always had an audiobook on in the background. So I would be like, I'm an only child, so I'd be like playing with my Legos or whatever, and I'd have an audiobook on in the background. Or I'd be sent to my room to tidy up your room, and I had an audiobook in the background. And I've been thinking about this lately because I loved audiobooks and I love being read to. And my mother would sometimes give out to me because she was reading to me out loud and I was like drawing or something. And she was like, "You're not paying attention." And she would make me repeat what she just said to prove that I was paying attention. And I was. And now I find that I drift off when I'm listening to audiobooks unless I'm doing a task at the same time. And it happened to me with Beowulf. Like we were sitting on the sofa, you were reading it to me, and I couldn't pay attention. I
can explain this. I can explain this neuroscientifically if you want.
In like a second. Because then yesterday I was cooking and you started reading it to me. And suddenly I was like, I'm chopping tomatoes and I know exactly what you're saying to me.
Yeah.
So go.
That's totally valid. And that is, I'm so glad you said that, because that gives evidence to the argument I've been making a long time, which is, so the amount of attention that your brain can handle is pretty set for like you as a person. Like each person can handle about the same amount of information, and it's usually within like a relative range. And that will change, if you're tired or hungry or, you're in pain. All those things will factor into the amount of things you can pay attention to. But generally speaking, let's say it's a thing out of 10, just for the sake of the example. If an audiobook is slow, so this is the number one thing that, like, if people start an audiobook and they're like, I can't pay attention, most likely the reason it's too slow for them. And that seems counterintuitive, but the reason is your attention can go up to a 10. So if the audiobook is really slow and you're only listening to it on a 3, your brain can be like, I really like the color purple. Wednesdays are a really good day to wear pink. And you can just drift off because you have 7 spots left of energy left for attention. So if you speed up the audiobook, your brain has to pay more attention to it.
Yeah.
So it is not allowed to drift off as much. You have to pay attention to it. So that doesn't mean go up to 3.5 or whatever. It just means that like even just like incremental increases your brain, and you will hit a point where it works the best for your brain. I've found 1.8 to 2.2 tend to be a lot of people's good range, but it varies obviously. And at that point, your brain is tuned into what it's doing. But the secondary part of that is that there's a lot of menial tasks that we do that don't take up a lot of brain space, but do take up a lot of processing space. So something like cutting vegetables or breaking the grass or doing laundry or something, like the act of doing that is your brain is firing, but you don't have to pay a lot of attention to it. So it eases that part of your attention, allowing you to then focus on the thing that is only the mentally tasking part of your brain. So a lot of ways of doing that will actually make it easier to focus, not worse. The main time that it's not as good is when there's 2 things competing for the same type of attention. So like if you're watching TV and listening to an audiobook, that's 2 different streams trying to hit in. So that's going to be difficult. But
I tried. So I think I had a conversation with you actually a while ago, genuinely asking you, okay, what about the reading speed or the audiobook speed? And then you said the incremental increases. So I experimented. Now, I still don't read or listen to shit at like 2 or whatever. But I tried it with at least something that I thought I could absorb information and there's not too much else going on in the book that I can do it. And I don't remember if it was one of the Expanse that I tried it with or something that I was reading recently or listening to in the last couple of months. And I said it to you where I was like, okay, so I listened to like a couple of chapters at 1.2. And then I like downloaded a sports video game. And I was mindlessly playing it for a while, then like cooking dinner.
I think it was one of the Expanse ones, yeah.
And then I said, okay, I'm going to increase it to 1.5 after like an hour. And then after another hour, I increased it to 2. And I was like, okay, I am paying attention. And then I went back to like normal, what I thought was normal.
And it
at-
sounded
at
real slow.
It sounded so slow.
It
I'm like,
sounds like you injected them with a ton of drugs and filled their mouth with molasses. I'm like, I don't know how
yeah.
anyone can do this.
But I find that fascinating, and that's probably something that you can train your brain in. Now, I still kind of think that there are certain kinds of books that I just can't read or listen to at that speed. Like, I can't do that with Malazan. There's too much going on under the surface.
I don't even listen to Malazan.
Yeah.
There's
So,
some things that are just too chaotic.
yeah. But even something like, I don't know, something like The Grapes of Wrath at the moment, Steinbeck. I would not like to listen to it. Not even like listen to it fast, but just listen to it. I want to read that. But again, that's preference. But there's a lot of stuff going on under the surface that I feel like even if I listen to it and then sped it up, I would lose that ability to sit and ponder because I'm just moving on to the next thing now.
And that is for sure a thing that happens to me sometimes. I try to be really intentional about how audio affects my experience and whether or not it's worth it to revisit another place. Because I get through so many more audiobooks a month than physical. So there's plenty of books I'm using that too to like check out or narrow down off my list. But there's lots of books that I don't. Like I'm rereading Paper Menagerie right now, which is a short story collection by Ken Liu. And I've never listened to the audiobook. I have no interest. I'm not even going to try.
Yeah.
I've already read this book. I know that I like to just sit and experience it physically. And there are books where, you know, when I listen to them, I might like them, but I'm like, oh, you know what? This would have been better had I read it physically. And I kind of mentally task myself to be like, one day I should reread it physically. And that just comes with practice. You learn yourself. You learn what you like and what you don't like. Anything with beautiful prose, I appreciate, but I tend to wish I read physically. But there are exceptions. Like I really liked listening to Name of the Wind. I think I enjoyed it better because his prose has a very lyrical quality to it. So you it's kind of mesmerizing. So it's like as you're listening to it, like I actually don't remember that much about that book specifically because I was more like just enamored by the way he told the story, less so than the story itself, which lended itself much better to audio for me. But yeah, no, I totally get it. Like there was one chapter of Memory of Ice because I have the audiobooks and I do immersion read sometimes. And I really just wanted to like know what was going on. So I put my speed down to like 1.9 or something. And I had to go somewhere and I was listening in the car and I followed it like technically well. Like I could tell you what happened in the chapter. But then as soon as I got home, I just reread it anyway. Because I'm like, I'm sure I missed like 50 things. So
yeah.
This is such a cool conversation because like we both don't audio that much. You're audioing more than me, and like
on selective things. Still, I'm still being very selective with it.
Mm-hmm.
You've kind of touched on it, but I wanted to ask you specifically because I obviously first thing out of the way, if you're listening to a book rather than reading it physically, it obviously counts just the same, right?
Right.
But it is a different experience.
Yes.
Listening to a book versus reading a book physically. It's just you're engaging with it in a different way. So I've had that like once or twice just once or twice because I just haven't tried that many audiobooks. But I tried the Red Rising audiobooks because I thought I'm rereading them, so I might as well on reread try the audio, and then I don't have to pressure myself that much if I miss something or whatever. And I found that while I was like walking to work listening to the audio, really enjoying the audio, but it made me want to go pick up the physical book. And I don't know if that was just because, this is a case of...
you also just love that series. But also for sure, yeah. One thing I would say, people, when they're just getting into audiobooks, memoirs of people you're interested in are really good starter places, and so are rereads. The reason for memoirs, especially in our community, most of us don't read a lot of memoirs. Like you see everybody's wrap-ups, how many memoirs do you see? But on audio, we all have, or most of us have, a couple celebrities we're at least somewhat interested in. And almost every memoir is narrated by the person who is telling the story. And so you're already passingly familiar and you're not that invested. Like if you miss an aspect of Tom Felton's life, you're not going to be like, wait, what was he doing at age 12? And so you get used to like the experience of doing it, and you kind of see if it's something that works with your style of reading more often. That's always a good recommendation.
I've done memoirs. I've done memoirs on Audible, narrated by the people.
Yeah.
And they've been my favorite experiences with audiobooks.
Absolutely. It's so funny you say that, because memoirs is the only thing I really audio that isn't like a Harry Potter reread, because I'm attached to the audio. And I've listened to Tom Felton's actually, like, whenever that came out.
It was good. That's why I thought of it. I was trying to think of a good one.
Yeah, because he narrates it, and like he narrates it well, and like. But I was going to ask you, like, do you how do you pick whether you're going to read something physically or on audio? Is it like based on what you have physically? Mostly,
there's a lot of different factors. Sometimes sometimes it's just mood. Like when I was in school, I listened to the entire Percy Jackson series and reread the first 2 Hunger Games because I knew my attention was just split. I was working in the evenings and going to class in the mornings. I just wanted something easy to follow. And I knew that, and I didn't even want to try to listen to more complex stuff. A lot of times, like whatever comes in at the library, if I'm ready to read that, I'll listen to it. If I have the physical book available, I will try to maybe immersion read a little bit to get my bearings. And then as I go along the experience, I'm okay with readjusting. Like I might try to read a book physically and have the audio book on Audible and just realize I would rather just listen to this, or vice versa. I might start listening to it. I'm like, you know what? One really good example of this is I started the Trader Bear Cormorant, and I was really excited to try it after Jimmy's review. I'd heard good things, or actually this was before Jimmy's review, and I'd heard good things, and I listened to it for like 3 chapters, and I was like, this is the most awful experience that I have ever imagined for myself. This is like pulling glass out of my own face. So I stopped. And I was like, I will read this physically. And then everybody since has been like, this book is great. And it sounds like something I would really like. And I finally found a physical copy at my used bookstore. So I bought that physically. And I'm just sure that I'm just not going to listen to it. So it's really just learning what you like, what you don't like, being comfortable switching. I find a lot of times when people are trying e-readers or audiobooks, a lot of times they're so emotionally attached to what they did before that they're like, I don't read Kindle books because I like the physical book. Nothing beats me sitting here going like this and reading this book to me. Like I understand that is the superior experience for me, but I also understand sometimes I'm, at a concert waiting in line for half an hour before the doors open and I have a Kindle and then I could read for half it. So like just the flexibility of being able to roll with what you're feeling, I think really helps. And it's a large part of why I'm able to read so many different things in a month, because I listen to how I'm feeling. And if people do that and they don't hardline what they've always done, I think that they'll have a lot of success changing their reading habits.
So you're also studying, right? Are you still, or you just graduated?
I just finished classes. I graduate next month. Yeah, so I'm done.
Cool.
Oh yeah, I saw that. Like, congrats.
Yeah.
But a question on the like studying front, because I also like at the time when I was studying, I also studied something tangentially psychology, but it involved a lot of reading of dry stuff, academic stuff, and it completely put me off reading for about 4 years. How did you find reading for pleasure while balancing reading all that shit?
So that is an excellent question, because I went to school in 2 phases. So I went to school right when I turned 18, and then I went until I was about 21, and then I dropped out. But during that time, I basically didn't read fiction or like for pleasure, except for A Song of Ice and Fire and Harry Potter rereads. I'd be like, oh, Goblet of Fire never misses. Let's go. So that's basically all I would do. I think there's a couple of books. I mean, I know I read like American Gods during that time. It must have been during the summer. But at the time, I was just getting out of high school. It's a way more big transition when you're just entering adulthood to learn how to study and be in the world for the first time. And then plus, like my reading habits were just, I'm in my room for 5 hours. I guess I'll read a book. So it wasn't so much ingrained in how I live my life. It was more so just books were around and I was bored. So as soon as you get busy, that just falls by the wayside. So the second time I thought that would happen when I went back to school during the pandemic, I thought my pleasure reading would just go completely out the window, and it actually barely dipped. And the reason for that is because now the way that I relax is by reading a book, by listening to an
Yeah.
audiobook or by reading a physical book. It is so baked into how I experience my downtime
Yeah.
that it is no longer the fact that I'm doing the same activity. It is that one gives me energy and the other drains energy. And I think
Yeah.
it really depends on how you think of it, because if you go to class every day and you are talking to classmates and you are talking to, you're in a group project, and like there was one time I had to do like counseling psych. So I was in meeting or like groups where you have to counsel someone with fake stuff. That's all socializing, right? So you could say, oh, when I'm done school, like I'm doing school just to socializing, I don't want to socialize anymore. But people still do it, is because the way that they relax after school is to go out and socialize. So it's like the way that they're experiencing it in their brain is different. But if you view reading physically as like some sort of chore, and even it doesn't even have to be like consciously a chore, it just has to be like something that you find mentally taxing.
I think also, like you touched on it as well, it's where you are in life and how many other distractions you have and what you see reading as. Because
Absolutely.
my slump was 4 years, but I was 19 to about 23 or 4 or something. Yeah, 23. And
that's the time to read less books, generally speaking.
Yeah. So looking back, I'm like, no, I was in my early 20s drinking probably.
Yeah.
But now, the 30s edge into more of, I just want to sit on the sofa with my cat and read a book, and that is how I relax. So even if I were to like go back and study something now, I would still come home and relax with a book, probably.
Most likely, yes. I had a thought, but I lost it. But yeah, I totally agree that place and time plays a factor, and just oh, I know what I was going to say. No, I totally lost it. It's okay. We can move on.
You ponder in case it comes back. I just wanted to reply to Ben about the first binding because it took me a second to remember what the first binding is, and then I did, and I wish I could forget about it again because I read 80 pages of it and hated every second. And I don't know, Ben, how you did the whole book. Like, you did the whole book, right?
He hates himself.
I don't know how, because I remember I was starting it and messaging to some Discord going has anybody read this? Because I'm struggling. And Ben was like, yeah, I'm it doesn't really get any better. And then I stopped and he kept going. I was like, you're performing a service. I hate it. I hate it.
I love how much he hates that book. Him and Matt's fantasy book reviews really hate that book, and it's really funny. I did remember what I was going to say though, which is that in people's life, like if you look like macro levels, there's two big periods of where you increase in socialization. One is high school. You're learning who you are. You're learning who you like. You're learning what you want to be. Like you're really trying to expand your circle. That tends to be the biggest. And then for some people, the second one is the biggest, which is when you go to college or when you first enter adulthood. And that is subconsciously or consciously, depending on who you are, more of a transactional reason, even if the friendships are genuine. And the reason is you are entering the workforce, and so you need to develop contacts. And everybody does this. It is a totally natural thing to do. You're not a manipulative person for doing it, where you have to meet as many people as you can, and you want to find who are going to be your people and who's going to be able to get you that job and get you. And it's just, so your social circle expands so much, and you're going to school. So reading for pleasure just tends to dip during that time. Not for everybody. We have Jake in the comments who thinks that he's washed, but still reads 7 books a month, which is impressive. And but then when you settle into adulthood, it's not that you don't have friends anymore. It's not that you don't have people you want to see or social obligations. It's that you've decided the ones that matter, generally speaking. Mm-hmm. And it's almost always, not always, but it's almost always less than the amount of people you were hanging out with and drinking with when you were 20, generally speaking. So at that point, you just have more free time, and you're able to go back to the thing that you wanted to do. And if reading was that thing, it's a perfect time for it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. I have gone through minor phases of reading less, but I've just always read a lot. But then like in college, I was the worst literature student ever because we had to read like purely based on assignments, like over 1,000 pages a week in like just, you know, stuff we had to read for class, plus like optional readings and whatever. I fully intended to read all of that. And then I would go off and read whatever I felt like, because my brain would like I would read like a chapter of the thing we were assigned, and then that would remind me of something. I'd be like, I'm just gonna like read this for like an hour and then come back to the other thing, and then that would not happen. So I was reading loads in college, because then suddenly it was like the night before the whatever class, and I was like, shit, I have to read these 450 pages, because I was reading Outlander the entire week, you know? So like, so
I wish I was a better student. I went out drinking every night. I went to tons of concerts. I was socializing. I had no interest in doing my homework. I'm actually sad that I'm connected grades wise to that person, because like I'm graduating with a C+ to like average, which is not terrible, but I'm like, if you just take the last 2 years, it's way higher than that. But I'm attached to this dude getting C's and D's.
Yes.
See, the thing is, I was out drinking and socializing as well, but I was a major nerd, and all my friends were nerds. So we were drinking and socializing. I think I was just not sleeping. Like, I think I was just not sleeping.
You're also all readers talking about books, studying fun books.
We were nerds. We are like a huge nerd. So like that was the reason. If I had studied something else, it would have gone very differently.
Like I was just gonna say, I did. So my undergrad was in media, basically. And that was 3 years of me getting drunk and going into the radio studio. And literally, our radio shows were broadcast on campus. So there were speakers around the campus that would project you. We would get drunk, go into the studio and do that and entertain the college campus like that. 3 years of that. Very, very little in terms of like actual work being done. So when I got to the end of that 3 years and they gave me my piece of paper and they're like, here you go, whatever the score was, it was pretty decent. It was like the equivalent of like a B. And I was like, I don't know how I got a B. And I had this mini existential thing of like, shit, nobody's going to hire me. I'm not going to be able to do any work or like, you know, get any work. So I need to go do something important. So I then went and did a 2-year master's in work psychology. Randomly, not related at all to what I did, because I was like, that sounds important and I'm mildly interested in it. And I did that and it just killed my joy for reading. So for those 2 years,
so like in psych, you have to take like groupings of every sub genre of psychology.
Yeah.
And most of them are, you know, interconnected. And so you learn all the major stuff like 17 times, because each class, like, do I have to learn about Freud every goddamn class? The answer is unfortunately yes. But the most boring by far was organizational psychology, which is the foundations of work psychology. And I did not like that class whatsoever. I took one. You only have to take one of each thing. And for, I think, every other type, I took more than one. And I was just like, I'm done.
I did that. I did that for 2 years, Kyle.
Yeah. It would kill my joy too. I get
it. I mean, I actually find all of the theories and stuff behind it very interesting. But then when you get into the actual workplace and you realize that it's all just words.
That's exactly the absolute problem. Is that like it sounds good in theory, and then you're trying to apply it to a workplace, and I'm just like, no.
People don't want to like that.
No.
People just don't want to. It's funny that you're like, nobody's gonna hire me, and then you backpedaled and like tried to do the complete opposite and found it was like a load of bullshit basically. And like I
don't want to do that work now.
I did it like the other way around almost. Like so in Spain, I did high school in Spain, and you have to like specialize when you're in high school in like certain subjects. I don't know if it's like that in the US. But everybody around me told me to specialize in like science subjects, because they were like, that's how you'll get a job later. So then I like went to college and I started studying biology, because people were like, don't go into humanities, like social sciences maybe, like don't touch humanities. And I was like, okay, fine, biology, which is like, out of all the sciences, probably the worst one to get a job, but like, whatever. I lasted like half a semester. I was like, you know what? This is not working for me. I'm going to go study comparative literature. Fuck you. I'll find a job. Spoiler alert, 3 years later, I realized there was something to what people were saying. But at this point, it's too late. I doubled down and then I did a master's in creative writing, which is even less useful.
I took a creative writing course in university, and I hated the professor so much. And I was on a scholarship that year, and you had to be enrolled in 5 classes. But my classes were straight in a row, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So I woke up at like, I want to say 8 a.m. and I just went straight to class until like 5:45. And I didn't have any breaks, except I think there was a half an hour break in there at one point. It was just too much for my second year of school. So I was like, something I have to fail. I just have to give up. And it was creative writing. And I always wish that I had like chose a different one, because I would have liked to have learned more about creative writing. But it is also not very useful, except if you're writing. So
it's honestly like, I do believe that there's this like more old-fashioned notion of, you can't teach creativity and like whatever. You can absolutely teach a lot about creative writing. I believe that. I believe you can teach it. I believe you can teach techniques, exercises. You can like analyze other people's writing in a way, like as a writer. And there was a class that I took that was called Reading Like a Writer, which is a great title for a class and very interesting in theory, not the way it was executed. My master's was kind of a waste of money, to be honest, because it was not the approach that I would have wanted. So it was like a lot of...
You also did a chunk of it during the pandemic, and that was...
To be fair, that didn't help. Yeah. But because it was very based on like writing and then discussing the writing in a group, and that just doesn't work as well virtually with 25 people. But there was a lot of like, somebody would write something and read it, and then you were meant to discuss like what works about it, what doesn't. Everybody was scared to criticize anybody else's writing, and the teacher being like the first culprit. Like, they have to set the tone of like, this is a space where we don't attack, but we can still like... But like, the teacher would start and like everything would be praise, so then you'd just be showered in praise, but you wouldn't believe it because you've watched everybody be showered in praise, and you're like, I'm not learning anything from here. Like, the smallest bit of criticism would be lathered in like a huge like an avalanche of praise, and you're just like, it was not useful. So yeah, I do feel that it could be a useful thing to study if you're interested in it. Obviously not useful to earn money or like get a job, but useful to for yourself. But I would advise any young person or older person that asked me about it to really look into the program of the college, because I didn't, and I should have.
And also, like, the instructor of something makes such a fundamental difference. Of how, and this is a big problem with history, I find. And Alan, I think, is the perfect representation of a history teacher that can get people to learn history. There's all of these people who think that history is extremely boring, but it's because they learned it in history class, and it was just a boring man talking boringly about dates and treaties. And it's like, that is just boring stuff. Like, it's not like, and the way that somebody engages you in something is so important into your ability to buy into something. Like, my wife thinks that history is boring, and I've been trying to dissuade her of this for years with varying amounts of success. And then she watched Hamilton, and Hamilton is the bee's knees. And there was another time where we were watching something like way later, and it was like a procedural TV show, and somebody was talking about states' rights. She's like, that's the thing that Alexander Hamilton was fighting against. And I was like, you just learned history. And she's like, I guess I did. But it's because now she was interested. So, she just needs to learn it in like a fun little musical way. And but and I actually like something like Hamilton is such a great way of people to learn
Yeah.
history, because there's so
Totally.
many people who would not think that that's a way to learn history, and it is. So beyond my actual just like love of that musical, I also think it's an excellent learning tool. And it's why things like the Cicero trilogy from Robert Harris I really like, because it is very readable. It reads like a legal thriller. So a lot of people can
Entertaining.
read it, and it's super entertaining. But you're learning so much about Rome, and even like the American system that it's still at.
Yeah.
And I find that a lot of these things just depends on the way you were taught. It just gets cycled down into that person, and then things don't change if people aren't willing to go
It's
against that
actually
narrative.
that's actually the biggest thing that I use historical fiction for, or that I read historical fiction for, is, oh, I'm interested in this time period. I'm gonna try and see if this is entertaining and see if I learn anything. So it also then gives you the urge to then go and research the actual story, because
Yeah.
there'll be some things that are changed for dramatic effect, blah 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 blah. And my willingness to read historical fiction that has blatant, not just changes but errors, is like way down.
You
So
thinking of Con Eagleton's Rome series?
yeah, I don't want to read his Rome series
Don't read
because
it. I read it. It was one of the first Roman things that I read, and I liked it, but I still didn't love it. I was like, even I know, I was like, this is some silly shit. It's just really well written, silly shit. And now I'm like, I'm positive I reread them.
yeah,
I would not like. I
the
actually
thing is, like,
unhauled them recently.
I know that it would be entertaining because I've read Con Eagleton, I've read some of his Greek stuff, and I really enjoyed that, and I learned some stuff. And that one was more historically accurate.
He got way better after the first trilogy. His
Yeah.
Mongol series is pretty accurate. I just read the first book in that Greek one, The Gates of Athens, and yeah, it was really good.
Yeah.
I really think both of you would like his fantasy trilogy. It's very underrepresented, but it's The Empire Assault. The first book is Darien, and Ben and I read it, and we were both just blown away by it. I think it's very creative and like short, impactful fantasy. Like this is so rare in the fantasy genre. I'm just surprised. I just think it was marketed poorly or something. But none of the books are more than 350 pages, and they pack a lot in without being dense. Like there's only like 7 characters you follow in each book, maybe like give or take 1 or 2. And they're all like expertly defined because Con Eagleton is really good at characters, and each of them have like either a magic power or a magical item. And because he's not steeped in I'm sure he's read fantasy. I think he's even mentioned David Gemmell is one of his favorite authors. But because he's not steeped in the fantasy conventions and stuff, he doesn't do a lot of things that a lot of fantasy authors try to do, or like he's not trying to stick to like a magic system or even just like soft magic. He just throws in whatever the hell he wants. Sometimes there's an object and that object does X, Y, and Z. And sometimes a guy just can do a thing, and it's just really good. And I think you guys would really like it.
Yeah, definitely, because he can tell a fun story. I know that he can tell a fun story, but yeah. But with his Rome books, I would be able to appreciate that he's telling a fun story, but it's not why I want to read those books.
Yes.
Yeah, you'd rather like read him telling a fun story in a fantasy and then read historical fiction about Rome that is entertaining but still accurate.
It's also especially because I have books at my disposal that will give me what I want with exactly the same thing. Like there's a Spanish writer that is currently writing, it's going to be his magnum opus about chronicling the life of Caesar. And he's going to write 6 or 7 books.
Yeah, isn't like the second one just got translated to English, I think. I think I've heard. I don't know the guy's name, but I know who you're talking about. And
his name is Santiago. His name is Santiago Posteguillo.
Great. I'm glad you said it, not me.
Yeah. But yeah, he's working on that thing, and I'm like, why would I read Con Eagleton's series if I have this?
Yeah,
I absolutely agree. Also, after you've read the Cicero trilogy, that series would make you even angrier because, and I'm going to spoil this because it's stupid, and also it's just history, so like you can't spoil history.
I think I know what you're going to say.
What am I going to say?
Is Brutus his brother?
No, I'm not going to. They're foster brothers. I assumed you already
Okay.
knew that. That's page 1 stuff.
Okay,
I'm talking about something that happens in the last book. So
Okay, go for it.
in the first 4 books, you follow the reign of Caesar, and then the 5th book you follow Octavian, who then becomes Augustus. And he wrote the first 4 books, and then he said he was done, and then he had to fulfill his contract to finish out his contract with that publisher. So he's like, well, I'll go and write 1 more of these books and tell Augustus' story. And that was written way later, and you could just tell he phoned it in because he had all these supporting characters in the first 4 or like, second to 4 or whatever books that are like Caesar's commanders and generals and stuff that are all like friends with Octavian in those books. And they're just not mentioned at all in the 4th book. And I'm like,
Okay.
why? Or sorry, the 5th book. And I'm like, why would you just like, it's like he just like started over from scratch. But then the crazier thing, the thing that I think would make you mad, is Cicero is a character in the first 4 books, maybe not the first one very much, but 2, 3, and 4 for sure. And spoilers for how Cicero 2,000 years ago died. He and Mark Antony had a big argument about who to execute. And they argued about it for a really long time, and they had this prescription list, and they came to Cicero, and they argued about it for like 2 days on Cicero. And finally, Augustus agreed, and then somebody went and assassinated Cicero. This happens without mentioning Cicero's name. So he's a character in the first 4 books. In the 5th book, he's not mentioned 1 time, like literally never. And then they're like, the line is something like, Mark Antony and Augustus argued over some names for several days before deciding on the difficult people who they needed to kill. Once that was done, they moved on. And I'm like, you're just going to kill Cicero without telling us about it? I just couldn't believe it.
Okay.
That is such a weird choice.
It's so weird. I want to ask him about that choice. I'm like, why are you doing this?
That is definitely him fulfilling a word count for a contract.
For sure, that's exactly what that book felt like. It's his worst book by far. It's not even close.
I haven't even read it, and it annoys me because I love the Cicero trilogy.
I know, that's what I'm saying. I'm like, Cicero's so cool.
No.
How dare he disrespect Cicero?
No.
How dare he? Thomas Jefferson would be so mad right now. All right, guys, this went much longer than I expected. I usually keep these about 2 hours, but we were having such a great conversation that I wanted to keep it going. You guys are awesome. And, well, Jake, it was the final book of the book series that you are determined to read, so good luck. Just skip it. Read a different series, Jake. I promise you, you're going to have a better time. But yeah, this was such a great conversation, guys. Thanks so much for coming on. And do you guys want to say anything about anything you have coming up? Any fun video ideas, books you're going to read? Anything that you might want to tell people before we leave?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having us. This was really fun. I can't believe we went for almost 3 hours.
That was really fun.
Insane. That was
really fun.
Yeah.
Really, really cool.
Time passed.
What do we have coming up? Well, obviously we're doing the month of Philip. I'm actually going to be on Fantasy Awash tomorrow, chatting to Laura about Emily Henry, because we've both fallen down a Emily Henry shaped rabbit hole. So we're going to chat about
Can
that.
you convince her to read a Cormac McCarthy book?
Oh. I want Laura to read any Western at all, because I kept saying to her that I didn't like Westerns before, but I realized that I was lying to myself that I wasn't really into Western movies, but then I was only not into a certain kind of Western movie. So I got over that real quick by reading some really great ones.
You're basically just not into spaghetti Westerns.
Yeah.
I also am not into spaghetti Westerns.
And that's the only aspect of it that I'm not into. Everything else, I'm like, oh yeah, I totally love being on this ranch. This is great.
I don't like the ranches either. Like, Lonesome Dove was working so hard to get me invested. Like, it's like a steep, like that. You know that meme of like from the Green Mile where John Coffey's like has all the dirt on his face. He's like, I'm tired, boss. I'm tired. And then so then the meme became like when you leave the fan on in the room for the whole winter, and it's like, I'm tired. That was Lonesome Dove's attempt of ability to get me interested. It was just like working overtime, but it's just because everything else is so good that I could accept the Western.
Anyway,
when he was reading Lonesome Dove, sorry, I know we're wrapping up, but just this is so funny. He was reading Lonesome Dove, and I was reading Fourth Wing at the same time, right? Like same quality, and and I was like determined to not use my brain and just have a great time with Fourth Wing, and he interrupts me. This is like, by the way, like 2 a.m. We're both up reading, and he's like, "So cattle, what does that mean actually? Like, what does cattle include?" I'm like, "I don't know." Keep
That's
reading.
a direct quote.
And he's like, "But like, why not just say cows? So it must be something different." I'm like, I don't care really.
I started looking up the
Yeah.
umbrella terms.
He gave up and like silence. I'm like, great. 5 minutes later, phone in his hand. So I have the Wikipedia page open, and he started explaining it, and I was just like,
Yeah, I realize I'm so into cows, man. Yeah. Anyway.
That's funny.
Anyway.
Yeah, what do we have coming up? Your chat with Laura about Emily Henry.
I also have an Emily Henry video coming out tomorrow, which was not planned, but I was editing that video when Laura texted me about reading Emily Henry. So like the stars aligned. So that, and we're going to do a Power of the Dog video.
Oh, yes. We're going to...
I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah.
But only if it's the Western one.
Yeah. Exactly. We're going to compare both powers of the dogs.
Power of the Dog squared.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, other than that, yeah, we don't really plan things too far in advance. So I don't know what else we're going to do. But thanks a lot for having us on, Kyle.
Yeah, absolutely, guys. It was wonderful. We're going to wrap up here. Chat, as always, is awesome. Thank you guys for showing up and asking good questions. And your general tomfoolery is always appreciated. So bye, everybody. See you next time.
Bye.
Ciao.